Chapter 173. For a famous cultivation sect like the Kunlun Party, its inheritance for thousands of years was naturally passed down through the method of passing down from master to disciple. Starting from the two founders, Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo, the torch was passed down endlessly until today. Therefore, taking in disciples was actually a very normal thing in the Kunlun Party. Generally speaking, most cultivators would take in disciples. It was not that there were no cultivators who did not take in disciples, but it was very rare. As for the reason, it was actually very simple. This was just like the inheritance of a family in the human world. The foundation that one had painstakingly laid down all their lives would always be hoped that someone could inherit it. The achievements one had made in the path of cultivation would always be hoped that someone could carry forward it, and at the moment of one's death, most people would always hope that there would be someone by their bedside to take care of them in old age. This was the innate nature of countless people in the vast land of the divine central continent. Whether one was a cultivator or not, or an ordinary person, it was very difficult to jump out of this concern. However, it was also because of this that taking in disciples, especially in a famous and large sect like the Kunlun Party, carried another layer of caution. This was because the inheritance of one's path of cultivation was not only related to one's life, it was also related to the growth and decline of the sect's strength. If a mere odd-job disciple jumped out and announced to the world that he would take in one disciple today and another tomorrow, what was the use of teaching the old and young of the sect being trash? Of course, the Kunlun Party would not allow this to happen. In fact, in order to allow most of the young disciples to better and more focused on cultivation, the unconventional rule in the Kunlun Party was that other than odd-job disciples, disciples in the Qi refinement realm and most disciples in the foundation establishment realm were not qualified to take in disciples either. Normally speaking, for the vast majority of cultivators in this world, Jin Dan Friar was the peak that they would never be able to reach in their entire lives. And in the past, the cultivators who were able to cultivate to Jin Dan realm, no matter if it was in terms of cultivation, strength, experience, or talent, they were often outstanding. Therefore, Jin Dan's acceptance of disciples was a boundary drawn by the Kunlun Party. Of course, there were still some areas that were unclear because many cultivators were stuck at the foundation realm for their entire lives. When they grew older and reached the peak of the foundation realm, the Kunlun Party would give them a way out and allow them to accept some disciples. In short, in the Kunlun Party, Jin Dan Friar had the qualifications to accept disciples. And Su Qingjun was precisely the youngest Jin Dan Friar in the past few thousand years of the Kunlun Party, this ancient sect. It was just that her talent was really too high and her current age was really too young. So much so that when the vast majority of people, including her master, Masato Kihara, were exclaiming in joy and admiration for her cultivation, they subconsciously forgot that Su Qingjun already had this kind of unconventional qualification to take in disciples. You accept disciples? Masato Kihara looked to be in a daze, as if he had yet to wake up from his disciple's words. Su Qingjun very calmly nodded her head and said, "Yes, Master, I think I have this qualification right." Masato Kihara thought for a moment and suddenly realized that his disciple was really right. This discovery made his old face turn black. He paced back and forth a few steps in front of Su Qingjun and murmured, But this is too that. He suddenly raised his head, frowned and looked at Su Qingjun, said, "You yourself are only 22 years old, do you know?" Su Qingjun said, "I know." "Then why do you still accept disciples?" Su Qingjun sternly said, "Among the ancestors of our Kunlun Party, which one of them has ever issued a decree saying that the 22 years old Jin Dan Friar is not allowed to accept disciples?" "I really don't think so." Masato Kihara touched his head in distress and said, "But there wasn't a genius like you in the past." Su Qingjun snorted and said, "Master, you can't have the meaning of blaming me because of my talent." I won't. Masato Kihara hurriedly denied, but then he frowned in distress and said, "But this doesn't feel too good, June girl." This matter certainly seemed a bit strange. Generally speaking, most of the young people at Su Qingjun's age were still in the Qi refining realm, or at most the foundation building realm. Even if there were some young geniuses like her in the whole world, they were often so young that they were completely focused on their cultivation. In their eyes, there was only the higher Yuanying realm and the legendary deity transformation realm. Who would be distracted to accept disciples? Even if they wanted to accept disciples, shouldn't they wait until they were 50 or 60 years old, when most of their potential was exhausted and the upper limit of their future was already in sight? Masato Kihara naturally raised his doubts, hoping to pull this obedient female disciple of his back from the crooked path. Who knew that on this day, Su Qingjun was exceptionally stubborn. She said she wanted to accept disciples and she would accept disciples, refusing to give in at all. Just as the two of them were arguing, and Masato Kihara was beginning to get angry from embarrassment, they heard a sudden loud noise from behind the mountain peak in the distance. Then, several beams of light shot up into the sky, illuminating the heaven and earth. Not long after, they swayed and danced, turning into the image of a dragon and a tiger. They were so dazzling that people couldn't look at them directly. Masato Kihara's expression suddenly changed slightly. She looked at the strange light in the sky for a moment, then said to Su Qingjun, "We'll talk about this later." Then she leaped up and flew toward the place where the strange light was shooting up into the sky. Su Qingjun was also shocked by the strange light. Although the flying goose platform was very far away, she could still feel the waves of abundant and unstoppable spiritual power of heaven and earth, like an invisible whirlpool, crazily surging toward the place where the light was rising. This was the scene that all cultivators in the world yearned for even in their dreams. Someone had broken through the great life and death juncture. Breaking through the great illusion, seeing the great joy, obtaining supreme magic power, understanding the mysteries of the world, seeing through the true meaning of Taoism, ascending to the sky in one step, and becoming a superior person. It was becoming a perfected being. This day was full of ups and downs. It seemed that one thing followed another, and each one was bigger and more important than the last. It was simply too much for the eyes to take in. At first, in Kunwa City, the people of the Su family kidnapped people in the downtown area, attracting onlookers. Then, the scene suddenly changed. The genius girl of the Su family, Jin Dan, came and caused a disturbance in the Su family, causing a sensation in the whole city. Then, what happened next made the things that happened in Kunwa City instantly dim. After 11 years, the light of proving true appeared on the mountain of Kunlun again. The 5,000-year-old Kunlun finally had a great perfected being in the Yuanying realm. Apart from the extremely small number of deity transformation stage perfected beings who were endowed with extraordinary talent and great luck, perfected beings of the Yuanying realm were almost the pinnacle of human cultivators' achievements on the path of cultivation. When one reached the level of the Yuanying realm, one's talent was no longer completely determined by one's innate talent. Opportunities, luck, external forces, and various spiritual materials and resources were almost inexhaustible. Only then could there be hope to create an incomparably powerful perfected being of the Yuanying realm. The great life and death juncture, which made people's expressions change at the mention of its name, was like a thunderclap reverberating in the ears of the cultivation world. It was also the most famous abyss. Many geniuses failed in this place and fell into the yellow spring when they were only one step away from the peak of their life. The significance of a perfected being of the Yuanying realm could never be overestimated. This was also the case for a famous sect like the Kunlun party. Although among the 5 great sects of Xianxia, deity transformation stage perfected beings were the face, the wind, and the strong guarantee, under normal circumstances, unless it was a matter of life and death for the sect, deity transformation stage perfected beings absolutely wouldn't make a move. Naturally, there were all kinds of connections, restraints, and restrictions. However, perfected beings of the Yuanying realm were the foundation of a great sect. This couldn't be wrong. When the light of confirming reality soared into the sky, not only did the entire Kunlun mountain instantly stir, even the big and small places outside of Kunlun mountain held their breaths. The people in Kunwa City also instantly forgot about the previous liveliness. Each and every one of them gazed at the strange light in the depths of the mountain, which was connected to the sky. The head of the Kunlun party, Idle Month, quickly rushed over from Tiankuan Peak. Before he arrived, there were already 7 or 8 perfected beings standing in the air, looking down at the 3 zhang tall mountain below. Yes, the light of confirming reality was emitted from that immortal's cave. It was Xian's master, Dongfang Tao. After perfected person idol month, other perfected beings of the Kunlun party, Yuanying perfected beings, rushed over one after another. The friendship of fellow disciples was one thing, but those who achieved the perfected being realm knew more about the hardships and dangers than ordinary people. It was indeed worthy of great joy and celebration. In addition, there was another meaning that could only be understood. The moment one became a perfected being, the light of confirming reality would soar into the sky and produce all kinds of special illusions, which could somewhat reflect the accomplishments of the perfected being's cultivation technique and the level of his cultivation. Although it couldn't be too accurate, this light of confirming reality couldn't deceive people. At the very least, it would give people an idea. Before long, in the sky outside the 3 zhang tall mountain, many silhouettes appeared near and far. They silently and concernedly looked at the immortal's cave and the light of confirming reality. At the foot of the mountain, there were also many people rushing over one after another. Xian stood at the very front, just outside Dongfang Tao's immortal's cave. Her eyes were full of surprise and expectation. She looked at the strange scene over there without blinking. Beside her, Melaleuca japonica had a face full of emotion. Her expression was somewhat complicated as she looked at the immortal's cave. Other than them, there were also many people from the Kunlun party who were attracted over. Of course, among them, there couldn't be people with low cultivation. For example, the odd job disciples wouldn't join in the fun. Those people with innate talents didn't even have the qualifications to see the light of confirming reality. It was better for them to honestly go back to work. Somewhere in the sky above the 3 zhang tall mountain, the head of the heavenly soldier hall, Dukan Jinren, stood on the clouds with an indifferent expression. Beside him, He Yi's expression was calm, but his expression was slightly complicated as he looked at the strange light that could pierce through the sky and the earth. After a moment, Dukan Jinren's voice came from the front. He said, "If you must go and ask him, be careful. Old man Dongfang's temper isn't good." Yes, disciple understands. Chapter 174. The majestic Kunlun Mountains were undulating. Even in broad daylight, there would always be shadows, and there would always be places where the sun could not shine. The martyr's grave was such a place that seemed to be forever hidden in the darkness. When the dazzling spiritual light shone upon the mountains, everyone gasped in admiration. The light came from far and near, but it did not fall on the back of the dark mountain, unable to shine into the shadows. The corpse stood silently in the dark courtyard, looking up at the light in the sky and the faintly discernible dragon and tiger phenomenon. It galloped unhindered, arrogant, and symbolized the greatest power in the world. After a long while, he turned around and walked into the darkness without a sound, like a lonely ghost left behind in the mortal world. The divine light of testimony was a rare cultivation phenomenon. Many cultivators would not be able to see it even once in their lives if it was not for a fortuitous encounter, let alone a regular person. That was why, although Lu Chen was heavily injured, Su Qingjun helped him sit up in the straw hut on Flying Goose Terrace. She leaned against the windowsill and looked out at the strange light in the sky. Su Qingjun sat by his side and supported him. For some reason, both she and Lu Chen seemed to be unperturbed despite the fact that their identities, positions, and abilities were worlds apart. When she saw the divine light of testimony in the sky, Su Qingjun could not help but feel excited. Even for a publicly acknowledged genius like her, the Yuanying realm was still a distant goal. There was still a long way to go. Not to mention the legendary Great Gate of Life and Death where geniuses would die prematurely. No one could be certain that they could pass it. When she collected her excitement and calmed down, Su Qingjun quickly noticed that Lu Chen's expression was a little too calm as he gazed at the mystical light in the distance. For a lowly errand disciple, the wondrous scene that appeared right now was very likely a realm that he would never be able to reach in his entire life. However, even though Lu Chen looked at it very seriously, he did not seem to be excited at all. He seemed to be calmer than Su Qingjun, like an indifferent and ordinary person. "What's wrong?" Su Qingjun asked Lu Chen. She was a little concerned, but also a little curious. Lu Chen replied. Su Qingjun pointed at the light in the sky and said, "You don't seem to be too interested in the divine light of testimony." Lu Chen was startled for a moment. Then he smiled and sighed. "Eldest miss, if you had dozens of wounds on your body like I do right now, the pain would be excruciating and you would want to faint immediately. You wouldn't be able to lift your spirits for other things." Su Qingjun gave it some thought and agreed. She sighed softly and said, "I was careless." As she spoke, she helped Lu Chen lie down again and said in a low voice, "You should rest well." Lu Chen looked at her face and suddenly said, "What you said outside before, were you serious?" Su Qingjun said, "What?" Lu Chen said, "Of course, when you announced to your master that you wanted to accept me as a disciple." You heard it?" Lu Chen closed his eyes and said, "Your voice was not low at that time." Su Qingjun smiled and said, "I was serious." Lu Chen sighed and said, "Can I refuse this matter?" What? Su Qingjun was shocked. It was clear that Lu Chen's reaction was beyond her expectations. Lu Chen didn't say anything and only calmly looked at her. After a moment, Su Qingjun frowned and asked, "Why?" Lu Chen said, "Your master was not happy." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Are you afraid of him?" Lu Chen said, "Your master is spiritual master Yuaning and I am an odd-job disciple. Do you think I should not be afraid of him?" Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she softly said, "I clearly only want to accept a disciple. Your identity is not the same." Lu Chen somewhat helplessly interrupted her words and said, "Your talent is too good. Everyone has placed too much hope on you, especially your master. So he will definitely not allow anything that could delay your cultivation to happen. Moreover, I am older than you." Su Qingjun was startled and said, "You still care about this?" Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, "You know I am thick-skinned. Of course I don't care about this. But other people care. You are a 22-year-old young lady and you accepted a man who is several years older than you as a disciple. Moreover, his talent is very poor. What do you want other people to think?" Su Qingjun coldly snorted and a trace of anger flashed across her face. But she didn't say anything. Lu Chen sighed and said, "Of course, others would only think that you're possessed, or perhaps you're young and insensible, and you've been seduced and bewitched by others. Then no one will come to find trouble with you. But if you really accept me as a disciple, I am afraid that the entire Kunlun mountain will not be pleasing to the eye. When that time comes, do you think I can live long?" Su Qingjun looked deeply at Lu Chen and suddenly said, "Your current reaction is completely different from what I originally thought." Lu Chen said, "Oh, then what did you originally think?" Su Qingjun said, "I thought that if I told you about this, you would jump 3 feet high and be elated and in disbelief. Then you would cry bitterly and kneel in front of me, hugging my feet and calling me master." Lu Chen raised his hand with some difficulty and scratched his head. He smiled and said, "It seems that it should be like this." "Well, yes, I have already prepared to kick you away," Su Qingjun said calmly. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. He looked at Su Qingjun's beautiful face. After a moment, he gently nodded and said, "Thank you." "You are welcome." In the end, Lu Chen ultimately did not become the disciple of the Kunlun party's youngest genius, Jin Dan Su Qingjun. This title, which was enough to make all the younger generation disciples drool, was far away from him. However, probably in order to make up for the harm that Lu Chen suffered this time, and also to better protect him from being targeted and framed by her own family in the future, under Su Qingjun's insistence, Lu Chen still obtained the title of a nominal disciple. The title of nominal disciple was very different from the official disciple who formally entered the sect. Basically, it could be seen as a kind of exchange of favors. For example, a certain cultivator with profound cultivation accidentally owed a favor, but this favor was not enough for him to accept a disciple and teach him. Therefore, there was this kind of compromise method and title. Generally speaking, a nominal disciple could not obtain the master's Tao inheritance. It was nothing more than a topic that could be used to brag on normal days, and an excuse to pretend to be fat at one's own cost in times of crisis. Of course, with this title, others could not recklessly bully him. Otherwise, who would know if that master's mood was good or not? If he angered a great cultivator and came to find trouble, wouldn't he be in big trouble? Therefore, this method was equivalent to Su Qingjun giving Lu Chen a talisman. It was equivalent to indirectly telling the people outside that although this handyman disciple was a waste, he was now a nominal disciple of Su Qingjun. They could not casually bully him anymore, otherwise, she might be angry and not be polite. For the final result, Masato Kihara did not have any objection. He had seen a lot of nominal disciples, and they were not considered real disciples at all. As long as it did not affect Su Qingjuan's cultivation and reputation, he was too lazy to care about the trivial matters of the Su family. But even so, with Su Qingjuan's current reputation in Kunlun Mountain, suddenly having a nominal disciple, even if it was just a handyman disciple, was still very sensational. Logically speaking, this matter should have been a little troublesome, and people would talk about it for a while. But fortunately, during this period, the matter of Dongfang Tao becoming a spiritual master Yuanying was too important. Very soon, it overwhelmed all other trivial matters, allowing Su Qingjun and Lu Chen to breathe a sigh of relief. After Dongfang Tao's divine light of verification appeared, it meant that he had truly broken through the great life and death barrier and become a spiritual master Yuanying. However, he did not immediately come out of the cave residence, but continued to cultivate in seclusion for more than half a month. Most people could understand this. The Yuanying realm was unusually strong, and it was equivalent to being reborn. After breaking through the great life and death barrier, it was normal for one's aura to be unstable and his foundation to be unstable, and he needed a period of time to stabilize it. And for cultivators, especially high-level cultivators, the safest place in the world was, of course, the cave residence where they cultivated in seclusion. Half a month later, Dongfang Tao successfully came out of seclusion. At that time, most of the Kunlun party's Yuanying Jinren and Jin Dan Friar were present to congratulate him. Even Lord Tianlan, who was not in Kunlun Mountain, sent someone to send a congratulatory message. Among the people present to congratulate him, of course, the leader, Spiritual Master Idol Month, was the leader. At that time, on the 30-zhang peak, there were as many Zenrins as there were clouds, and Jin Dan Jinren could be seen everywhere. It could be said to be a gathering of prosperity for a moment, and it was also a rare display of high-level cultivators for the Kunlun party. It once again revealed to the world the unfathomable strength of the majestic Kunlun. After Dongfang Tao came out of the cave, he was full of energy, and his eyes were shining. He was full of satisfaction, and he laughed 3 times towards the blue sky. Next to him, Yexin had already rushed over excitedly and hugged him with great joy. Dongfang Tao laughed loudly, and then nodded and smiled at Melaleuca japonica beside him. Then he strode towards where Spiritual Master Idol Month was. A gift of gratitude was still necessary. If there were no sects, there would not be so many spiritual materials and resources. If there were no sects, there would not be such a stable and peaceful cultivation environment. These words, everyone knew in their hearts. Dongfang Tao quickly approached, and just as he was about to greet, he was suddenly startled. He saw that among the group of Yuanying Jinren in front, Spiritual Master Idol Month was standing at the forefront, smiling and nodding at him. However, in front of everyone else, there was another person standing next to Spiritual Master Idol Month. It was a little girl who seemed to be only a little over 10 years old. Her face was calm, like the snowstorm on the winter peak, cold and slightly chilly. Chapter 175. On the day that Dongfang Tao became a perfected person and walked out of his cave residence, most of the important figures in the Kunlun party were present. Although the 2 highest-ranking perfected cultivators in the divine transformation realm did not come in person, they sent someone to send a congratulatory message. Perfected cultivator Tianlan's message was sent by perfected Qian Deng of Baichao Tang. Everyone in the Kunlun party already knew that perfected Qian Deng and perfected cultivator Tianlan had a close relationship, so no one was surprised. On the other hand, Hakushin Jinkuan sent a 10-year-old girl, who was, of course, White Lotus. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, White Lotus stood beside perfected cultivator Idle Month, in front of all the other perfected cultivators. Of course, this was a very meaningful thing, but there was enough reason to tell others about it, because White Lotus was holding the wind speech plate in her arms at that time. Hakushin Jinkuan used this treasure as a medium, which was equivalent to directly congratulating Dongfang Tao, so the meaning was naturally different. However, from that day on, everyone in the Kunlun party finally realized that in his old age, Hakushin Jinkuan regarded this 10-year-old genius girl, who was said to be a once-in-a-thousand-years genius, as his most valued successor. And because of this, there was another person that people had not noticed before, but now privately attracted attention again. It was the other incomparably powerful perfected cultivator in the divine transformation realm in the Kunlun party, who had not had a successor for many years. What on earth was that bald perfected cultivator thinking? How would I know what the damn baldy is thinking? Lu Chen raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine, then complained to old Ma. Anyway, what I know is that he is the most unreliable person in the world. Old Ma patted his shoulder and comforted him. You have suffered a lot this time. I understand that you are depressed. Believe me, he is not feeling good either. Lu Chen squinted at him, his face full of doubt and disbelief. What's wrong with you, Baldy? Old Ma said sternly, when he heard about this, especially when he heard that you gritted your teeth and endured it for the sake of the big picture, that you would rather be humiliated and seriously injured than do anything, he flew into a rage and angrily scolded the Su family for being bastards. He asked me to tell you that he will remember everything that happened today. Once he succeeds in the future, you don't even need to say anything. When he comes back, he will first start with the Su family. He will kill those blind trash to vent your anger. Bullsh *T. Lu Chen scolded. You've been talking for a long time, but you still won't budge. What was the use of that? If you have the guts, you can ask Baldy to go to the Su family now. With his ability, destroying the Su family is as easy as crushing a bug. Why would he waste so much time talking? Old Ma suddenly looked embarrassed. He smiled bitterly and said, This, Immortal is in a different position from us. He has more fetters, so he really can't do whatever he wants. As he said this, his face became serious and he promised Lu Chen again, Anyway, don't worry. Immortal has said again and again that this matter is not over. He will remember what happened to the Su family. Sooner or later, he will make trouble for them. Lu Chen rolled his eyes, with an expression that said, I am not a fool to believe you. Old Ma also laughed and quickly changed the topic. He said with a smile, Let's not talk about this. Anyway, that is what Immortal said. We will know in the future. By the way, are your injuries better? Lu Chen stretched his arm and said, I think they're almost healed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come down the mountain to drink with you. Old Ma nodded and said, Your injuries are recovering really fast. Although most of your cultivation has been crippled, at least your foundation is still there in terms of recovery. You can't even compare to a foundation-building cultivator, let alone an aura refinement disciple. Lu Chen was startled, but he soon nodded and said, I probably swindled a lot of panaceas from Su Qingjun these days. They're still somewhat useful. Old Ma looked at him enviously and said, Look at your life, it's too comfortable. Other people work themselves to death to save the beauty, but you just lie there and let the beauty save the black bear. You eat other people's food, use other people's things, and now you're even living outside other people's immortal's cave, right? He let out a long sigh and said with a bleak expression, What a pity, the world is so unfair. I, Ma Xiaoyan, have been an elegant young man for so many years, but why haven't any outstanding women taken a fancy to me? Have all the flowers been stuck in cow dung? Stuck my ass. Lu Chen scolded him without the slightest trace of politeness and said, Just lie there and let other people cut you dozens of times for me to see. Is that comfortable? Why are you pretending to be young? You're still an elegant young man. Wake up, it's been several decades and you've never lost any weight. You've always been like a pig. If it wasn't because that damn Baldy was fatter than you, I would have thought you were the reincarnation of a pig immortal. Even if there were flowers, they definitely wouldn't be stuck in your head. Old Ma's expression turned serious. He pointed at Lu Chen and shouted, I heard you, you called True Monarch the reincarnation of a pig immortal. So what if I called him? What do you want? Lu Chen glared at him. Oh, nothing. Your voice is the loudest, you're the best. Pretend I didn't say anything, Old Ma said calmly. How's the situation on the mountain? Old Ma asked as he poured him a glass of wine. Lu Chen took the wine glass and said, It's all right. The main thing is that Dongfang Tao suddenly became a true monarch. This matter was very sensational and attracted everyone's attention. Plus, I didn't really become Su Qingjuan's disciple, so it's not too conspicuous. Old Ma snorted and said, This time it's really an undeserved disaster. I was disgusted by those 3 Su families' trash. To be honest, if you hadn't stopped me with your gaze that day, I wouldn't have been able to hold it in. Lu Chen smiled and said, It's nothing. It's not worth it to ruin our big plan for those things. Old Ma hesitated for a moment, but lowered his voice and whispered to Lu Chen, Oh right, I've always wanted to ask you. Although you endured it that day, we didn't know that those guys actually hid such disgusting torture tools and made you suffer so much. But if Su Qingjun really didn't come, would you really endure it to the end? Lu Chen turned his head and looked at Old Ma. After a moment, he slowly shook his head and said, I won't. Then you're going to fall out with them? Old Ma asked. When they made their move that day, I had already made my decision. Once their attacks reached the point where my bones and muscles were injured and my life was in danger, I couldn't care so much anymore. I couldn't really wait for death to come, so I naturally had to make a move. Well, I think so too. Old Ma nodded, but then he glanced at Lu Chen. There seemed to be a trace of lingering fear in his eyes. He said, At the beginning, suffered such a serious injury and were cut so many times by those trash. I thought you would have been unable to endure it. Lu Chen smiled as he swept his gaze across his body. Beneath his clothes, countless scars could be vaguely seen on his flesh. He was silent for a moment and then said lightly, After being burned by the black flame for 10 years, I seem to have gotten used to the pain. Old Ma didn't say anything and just nodded silently. What do you plan to do next? Old Ma asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen stretched and said, What else can I do? Continue to live and then secretly find a spy. What should be done has to be done. All right, help me find some information. What information? The daily routine, whereabouts and preferences of the younger generation of the Su family. The more detailed, the better. Old Ma's eyes lit up. There was a trace of excitement on his face. He whispered, What's wrong? You can't stand it anymore? Lu Chen sneered and said, I'm not a saint. Do I have to bear it silently after being dealt with like this? No, I can't stand it. Old Ma slapped his thigh. The smile on his face suddenly seemed to have a bit of fierceness. He gritted his teeth and said, Isn't it like this? In our line of work, let's compete with each other. Who's afraid of who? Speaking of this, he paused for a moment and hesitated. He said to Lu Chen, But it has only been less than a month. If you immediately retaliate, will it attract attention and implicate you? Lu Chen said indifferently, I endured it that day, so I naturally won't act rashly for the sake of taking revenge. However, I can't let this matter go just like this. I have to find an opportunity to get it back and let them taste the true pain of this world. Old Ma looked at his face and frowned. He seemed to feel a trace of coldness. But soon his face returned to normal. He said, No problem. Anyway, I don't like these people. Don't worry about the information. I'll give it to you next time you go down the mountain. We brothers will kill them. Lu Chen hummed in acknowledgement and stood up, looking like he was about to leave. Old Ma seemed to suddenly think of something. He suddenly said to him, By the way, if you make up your mind to do this, what about Su Qingjun? Lu Chen paused and then said, What's there to worry about? She won't know that I did it. Old Ma nodded and said, Well, that's true. If we do it secretly, we won't be afraid of being known by others. But, I'm just asking casually. I'm a little curious. You said that the Su family is naturally hateful. It's not a big deal if we kill them. But I heard that Su Qingjun is a good woman. She is also very good to you. For you, she not only quarreled with her family, but also flipped the table and smashed the wall. She beat her younger brother. In order to take care of you on Mount Kunlun, she gave you the title of a nominal disciple. Lu Chen raised his eyes and quietly looked at Old Ma. Old Ma's voice became softer and softer. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly asked, "What do you want to say?" Old Ma said, "I want to ask you, don't you care about her feelings? I was injured and suffered. I want to take revenge. Why should I care about her feelings? But between the two of you, aren't there some, at least mutual appreciation?" Lu Chen's eyes were slightly lowered, like a shadow swaying in the dark. He looked at the light in the distance with no expression. After a while, he said lightly, "We are shadows. How can we be qualified to talk about love? You think too much." He turned around and walked out. At the same time, his voice carried a bit of coldness. He said, "Help me find out information about those people. When I do it myself, I think you may be a little relieved and no longer have any doubts." Old Ma stood still and watched Lu Chen walk out of the door alone. After a while, a smile suddenly appeared on his face. But the smile was a bit desolate and bleak. Chapter 176. Dongfang Tao, who had achieved the great cause of Yuanying Enlightened Master, could now be said to be an influential figure in the Kunlun party. He was an important figure that everyone in the sect paid close attention to. After all, it had been 11 years since the last Yuanying Enlightened Master of the Kunlun party was born. All kinds of welcoming and sending off, as well as all kinds of red tape, re-establishing his position and authority in the sect, all matters naturally fell into place. According to the rules of the Kunlun party, as long as one cultivated to the level of Yuanying Enlightened Master, he would be qualified to set foot on the 4 extraordinary peaks in the sky and clouds, the core of the Kunlun party, to cultivate. At the same time, Yuanying Enlightened Master's Immortal's Cave in the mountains would also be preserved. After these matters came to an end, Dongfang Tao formally held a ceremony to let Exen enter the sect as his master. She could be regarded as the first personal disciple he had ever accepted. After the news spread, the entire Kunlun mountain was in an uproar, especially among the various aristocratic families in Kunwu City, who reacted even more strongly. Although this news was heard by well-informed people, at that time, Dongfang Tao was at most a veteran Jin Dan friar. Later, when he was injured and went into closed-door meditation for a long time, his reputation became even weaker and almost no one had any scruples about him. But who would have thought that this old man would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat? After going into closed-door meditation for a long time, he unexpectedly produced a Yuanying Enlightened Master, which really caught people unprepared. Overnight, the prices of the small E family in Kunwu City skyrocketed. After all, Exen was now Dongfang Tao's only disciple. If nothing unexpected happened, she would very likely inherit Dongfang Tao's orthodoxy in the future. A powerful Yuanying Enlightened Master standing behind him was already enough to deter many influential families in this city. After formally becoming his disciple, Xianxia's status in the Kunlun party naturally rose to the sky in a single bound. Soon, she moved out of the fragrance garden and lived in the 30 Zhang Peak. When Dongfang Tao went to cultivate in the clouds in the future, this mountain cave would belong to Exen. There were still a lot of things to do in the following days. There seemed to be an endless stream of people coming to congratulate him and make friends with him. From cultivation sects to influential clans in Kunwu City, from big shops to cultivation sects and forces of various sizes around the Kunlun party, all of them sent people to greet him and make friends with him. Xian has really broadened her horizons. She only feels that the cultivation world in front of her seems to have opened a wider door. However, during this time, the pair of master and disciple on the 30 feet peak welcomed a special guest. When the young man handed the visiting card to Exen and waited patiently with a smile on his face, Exin had a strange feeling in her heart. On the name card, there were 2 words, he. When Dongfang Tao received the visiting card from Exin, he was also a bit surprised. He had been out of closed-door meditation for a long time, so he naturally knew some things he should know, such as the matter that happened to Exin that caused a sensation in the Cultivation sect. Dongfang Tao was naturally unhappy about the fact that his beloved disciple had almost been disgraced and almost disfigured. To be exact, he was furious and furious. However, the main culprit of this matter, He Gang, had already been dealt with and expelled from the Kunlun party. This punishment was very harsh in the cultivation world, so even Dongfang Tao couldn't say anything about it. Although He was He Gang's elder brother, he almost didn't do anything wrong in this matter. On the other hand, He Yi's status was absolutely not something an ordinary disciple, He Gang, could compare to. He himself was a talented disciple who was highly valued by the Cultivation sect. At such a young age, he had already cultivated to the peak of the foundation-building realm. It was very likely that in the near future he would become a Jin Dan friar. At that time, he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Su Qingjun, who was currently in the limelight, and become a true genius who had the hope of peaking into the Yuanying realm or even the deity transformation stage. Not to mention, He was not alone. Standing behind him was the powerful Yuanying spiritual master, Du Kong. The Heavenly Soldier Hall was also very powerful in the sect. If it was still the Jin Dan friar, the temperamental and easily angered Dongfang Tao might have gotten angry and directly chased He away. However, after cultivating to the Yuanying spiritual master, he seemed to have suddenly become a bit timid. Thus, he ordered Exin to invite He in to meet him. The atmosphere when they met was a bit awkward. There was no so-called meeting to forget enmity with a smile, and there was no amiable, happy, and polite scene. Dongfang Tao was indeed an old man with a strange temper. Although he suppressed his anger and didn't target He, his pair of bright eyes stared at He from head to toe. This was not a good sign. Fortunately, he didn't seem to care about this. He maintained a calm smile for a long time. Only when Dongfang Tao opened his mouth to ask questions did he answer them one by one. His attitude was always modest and courteous, neither servile nor overbearing. He even maintained an extremely elegant and courteous attitude towards Exin. It was difficult not to have a good impression of such a person. Even Exin was no exception. In the process of meeting Dongfang Tao, he said many things. Among them, there were some messages from his master, Du Kanjinren. The main idea was that Du Kanjinren would personally come over in a few days to bring Dongfang Tao to the strange peak between the clouds and the sky. He would also tell him about some of the special features of the mountain. This was obviously a favor, and it was a favor that was hard to refuse. With Dongfang Tao's temperament, his expression softened when he looked at He. He even praised him a few times. Before leaving, He whispered a few words to Dongfang Tao while Exin was packing up the tea set. Dongfang Tao's expression changed slightly, but he didn't reply. When he looked at He again, the expression in his eyes was different. After he left, Dongfang Tao pondered for a long time. When Exin passed by, he called out to her and said, "Exin, do you still remember the matter with He Gang?" Exin was startled for a moment. She didn't expect her master to suddenly mention this matter again. She immediately said, "That matter? I can't say I've forgotten it now. When I saw Senior Marshal Brother He just now, I actually felt strange." Dongfang Tao nodded. After a moment of silence, he said to Exin, "If they deliberately harmed you, I will naturally stand up for you. You don't need to be afraid. But since the past is in the past, you don't need to keep it in your heart. You don't need to hold a grudge against He." "Yes, your disciple understands." Exin nodded in agreement. She then glanced at Dongfang Tao and said, "Master, from what you've said, could it be that you have an opinion about this senior He? It's best if you don't provoke this person." Dongfang Tao said lightly, "You're saying that I can live here in the future?" Lu Chen's expression was a little surprised. Su Qingjun smiled and said, "Yes, the Flying Goose Terrace is quite big. Moreover, I have always wanted to find someone to help me cultivate some precious spiritual herbs. It's a pity that I haven't been able to find someone who I can trust, who has the ability to cultivate, and who is willing to work hard." So now that I've finally caught one, I can't let you run away so easily. Lu Chen clicked his tongue and then said, Is it really okay for me to live on the Flying Goose Terrace? Won't others gossip? Su Qingjun said lightly, Aren't you my disciple in name? Just think of it as me squeezing you dry and making you work for free. The situation she was talking about was not uncommon in the Kunlun sect. Some high-level cultivators would often take in nominal disciples, but they didn't pass on their skills and techniques. Instead, they would just give some spiritual materials and resources or basic techniques as a reward, and then have people specially cultivate important spiritual materials for them. Of course, Lu Chen had also heard about this. However, Su Qingjuan's words were of course a joke. He also laughed, then extended 2 fingers and said, I can move here, but I have 2 conditions. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, then she looked a little annoyed and said, Hey, do you know how many people in the entire Kunlun party have racked their brains to live here? You just have to be the most troublesome person. How dare you mention conditions to me? Yes, what you said is very reasonable. Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and said, 2 conditions, do you want to hear them? Speak. First, I don't want to live in this straw hut anymore, Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and immediately became vigilant. She said, Hey, don't push your luck. You want to live in my cave abode? That's absolutely impossible. Lu Chen laughed and said, What a joke. Do I look like that kind of person? I always feel that you do. You misunderstood. Lu Chen glared at Su Qingjun, then pointed to the forest behind him and said, I want to live in a wooden hut. I will cut firewood and build a house myself. It will be bigger and stronger, so that it won't be so easily destroyed. Is that okay? Su Qingjuan's cheeks were slightly red, and she softly muttered, Narrow-minded, stingy. What did you say? Oh, nothing. You can build a wooden hut. Later, when I have time, I can also cut down 2 big trees for you. Su Qingjun said seriously. Lu Chen nodded and said, Second, I want to raise a dog. What? Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and almost thought that she had heard it wrong. Lu Chen turned around and whistled loudly. A moment later, a woof-woof sound could be heard. A black shadow ran out from the forest and rushed to Lu Chen's side. It was Tu, who was dilly-dallying with him in a very intimate manner. Why is there so many wounds on this dog's body? When Su Qingjun saw the appearance of Atsu, she also gasped. Lu Chen sighed with a sorrowful expression. He said to Su Qingjun, This is an old dog that I've raised for more than 10 years. It's been with me through life and death situations. It's covered in wounds, and it's about to reach the end of its life. I really don't want to be separated from it. Can you do me a favor? Su Qingjun looked at Atsu with sympathy. When she was about to say yes, she suddenly felt a little strange. She frowned and said, But I don't think this dog is old. It is quite energetic. Lu Chen said calmly, This native dog is very young. Really? Well, don't just look at how lively it is. Who knows, it might suddenly die in a few days. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and quickly waved her hand. Forget it, it is just a dog. Let it stay. You don't have to curse it like this. Lu Chen laughed and said, Thank you very much, Atsu, thank you. Before he finished speaking, he suddenly stopped. Lu Chen and Su Qingjun turned their heads at the same time. They saw that Atsu, who was still circling around Lu Chen, suddenly sneaked to the side of the mountain wall. After sniffing for a while, it lifted its legs and peed under a rock not far from the stone door of the cave residence. Then it ran back leisurely, shaking its head and wagging its tail, looking very happy. Su Qingjuan's face darkened. She stared at Lu Chen. Lu Chen had an awkward expression on his face. He laughed dryly and said, You see, this dog is like a human when it is old. It pees a lot. So disgusting. Well. Chapter 177. In any case, Lu Chen and the black dog were now temporarily staying at the Flying Goose platform. Compared to the days when they were working tirelessly as handyman disciples in Baichao Tang, it was much more comfortable. It was comfortable to have Jean Dan Friar looking after them. Since he no longer had to work in the herb garden of the flowing fragrance garden every day, his days suddenly became leisurely. Lu Chen also had more time to do his own things. After his injuries recovered, he began to go to the dense forest behind the Flying Goose platform to cut wood, preparing to build the wooden house he mentioned before. Of course, a wooden house was more comfortable than a straw hut. Moreover, the forest covered a wide area, and there were hundreds of thousands of trees. Naturally, Su Qingjun would not be stingy with these things. Since she was young, she had never seen anyone cut wood to build a house, so during this period, she often stood at the side and watched Lu Chen work curiously. It took 4 to 5 days to build the wooden house. After it was completed, Lu Chen was in a good mood. However, Su Qingjun shook her head at the side, saying that the wood of the house was not bad, but it looked ugly. Since he had the status of a nominal disciple and was temporarily staying on the Flying Goose Terrace, it was impossible for Lu Chen to really do nothing and idle around all day. It would be hard for him to explain himself to the outside world. Therefore, he picked up his old job and cleaned up the spiritual field on the Flying Goose platform. He also expanded the area. Then, Su Qingjun got some spiritual grass and spiritual fruit seeds and planted them in the spiritual field. From then on, Lu Chen officially became Su Qingjun, the hard worker, who was specially squeezed by Jean Dan Friar to farm. This kind of person was very common in the Kunlun party. Generally speaking, even though people who did this kind of work still had the identity of a handyman disciple, there was always someone above them. It would sound very good if people said that they were no longer a handyman disciple of the Kunlun party, but that they were someone under the command of a certain Jean Dan or a certain Zhenren. Wouldn't that be a lot more impressive? Moreover, in terms of profit, the returns of the odd-job disciples who worked for these high-grade cultivators were much higher than before. As a result, there were many times when everyone was racking their brains for this position. The reason why so many people wanted to participate in the eagle fruit cultivation competition at the Flowing Fragrance Garden was because they hoped that one day, Su Qingjun would take a fancy to them. The best outcome was actually Lu Chen's current situation. After receiving this kind of treatment, Lu Chen was much more free than before. The spiritual fruits and spiritual herbs planted in the spiritual fields were also not as delicate as the eagle fruit tree that he could not easily leave. As for Su Qingjun, she was also quite polite to him and did not really squeeze him for labor. It should be said that his life was still relatively relaxed. Therefore, Lu Chen now actually had time to wander around the Kunlun Mountains. These days, many people in the Kunlun party saw Lu Chen walking around leisurely with the black dog, which attracted the envy of many handyman disciples. One day after that, Lu Chen brought Atsu down from the Flying Goose platform and took a casual walk. Then, they walked to the house near the Flowing Fragrance Garden where someone had once died. Back then, Xianxia died in this house. It was daytime, and most of the people who lived nearby were the lowest-level handyman disciples. Every day, they had to go to the Flowing Fragrance Garden to work, so the surroundings were quiet and there were not many people walking around. On the day of the murder, the Kunlun party had sent people to seal off the nearby area, but after a long time of investigation, there were no results. Until now, the disciples who were guarding outside had also been withdrawn. Except for the house that was still unoccupied, this place seemed to be no different from the surroundings. The traces of the person named Xianxia in this world were quickly and completely dissipating. The wind blew gently from the forest. Lu Chen and Atsu stood quietly in the distance and looked at the house. Neither of them spoke, like two dark shadows, silent. After a while, Lu Chen turned and walked to the side. He no longer looked at the house, but walked into the wide forest on the other side. Atsu followed behind him and walked into the forest. During the day, the forest was slightly darker than outside, but the light shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, making the forest appear brighter, and the surrounding trees could be seen clearly. Lu Chen walked in the forest with a calm expression. As he gradually went deeper into the forest, the surroundings quickly quietened down. The hustle and bustle that belonged to the Kunlun party seemed to be isolated outside the forest. In this forest, there was only silence. After walking for a while, he came to the place where he had come here to stare at late at night. That day, in a pitch-black night, this corner deep in the forest was so dark that one could not see their fingers in front of them, completely submerged in darkness. Now that it was daytime, Lu Chun could clearly see that there was actually a big tree in front of him. A big tree that looked very large and dense, older than the surrounding trees. The mottled bark was covered with moss, and a few drops of morning dew still remained on the branches and leaves. The strong roots protruded from the ground, looking like a giant claw tightly gripping the earth. Lu Chun stared at the tree for a while, then walked over. The forest was still silent. There was no wind, and there were no birds chirping. At this moment, the only sound seemed to be his footsteps, stepping on the dead leaves on the ground. The trunk of the big tree was very thick and large, requiring at least 2 people to wrap their arms around it. It was enough to hide the figure that was hiding. But this morning, when Lu Chun crossed the roots of the tree and walked to the back of the tree, it was empty. Atsu ran over and sniffed under the big tree for a while. It seemed that there was nothing special worth paying attention to, so it ran away to play at the side. Lu Chun looked at the big tree quietly, his eyes bright and focused. From the roots to the trunk, he looked at it bit by bit, as if he was carefully searching for something. However, nothing strange appeared on the big tree. There were no wounds, no scratches, and no hidden and twisted patterns. Everything seemed to be fruitless. Lu Chun frowned slightly. After pondering for a moment, he squatted down and carefully searched the roots of the tree that undulated like a horned dragon. He even used his hands to push away the dead leaves and black soil on the ground, and checked every hidden corner of the roots. However, in the end, he still found nothing. That evil sect spy hiding in the darkness seemed to have unusual patience and vigilance, and was not tempted this time. Lu Chun stood up, his face solemn. After a moment of contemplation, he called Atsu, turned and walked back the way he came, prepared to leave this place. A beam of sunlight shone down from the branches and leaves above his head, shone on his body, and also on the silent big tree beside him. The mottled traces seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of countless years. Lu Chun continued to walk forward, but at the 5th step he suddenly stopped. He frowned, seemed to have thought of something. The next moment his eyes suddenly brightened, suddenly turned around, but stared intently at the front of the big tree, at the ancient and mottled traces on the tree trunk. The sunlight shone down, perhaps because it had experienced too much time. The bark on the tree trunk showed signs of cracking. Even in the daytime, the martyr's grave at the back of the nameless mountain was still shrouded in darkness. The sinister cold air seemed to not recede all year round, emitting a rare energy in this famous mountain. Usually, not many people came here. Most of the people, including the cultivators, preferred to live in the light, even if it was the stone walls and caves that were required for cultivation. In fact, most of them were located in the sunny places. But this day, a tall figure walked in from outside the martyr's grave and knocked on that black door. Dongfang Tao, who had just achieved Yuanying Zhenren, came to the martyr's grave, this gloomy place. There was no one around him, indicating that he had come alone. When the chilly wind blew past from an unknown corner, his expression was equally indifferent. Only a trace of deeply hidden disgust could be seen in the depths of his eyes. With a creak, the black door opened. In the gloomy courtyard, those dark rooms stood silently in the surroundings. Some were completely dark, some flickered with dim candlelight, as if guiding the direction of the dead on the dark path. Occasionally, when the wind blew, those little candlelight would actually instantly turn green, like the burning flames in the eyes of an evil spirit. After a moment, it slowly returned to its original appearance. A thin, shriveled figure, whose entire body seemed to be shrouded in darkness, stood alone in the middle of this courtyard. His cold eyes shot out an icy light, coldly looking at Dongfang Tao, who was walking in. Dongfang Tao first looked around, his gaze paused on those dark rooms and those candlelight for a moment, finally landing on the corpse who was standing there, nodded and said, "Long time no see." The corpse faintly laughed and said, "Yes, you are always unwilling to come here to see me, of course. We have not seen each other for a long time." Dongfang Tao's expression did not change, and he calmly said, "This damned place is eerie, no one would like to come here." The corpse's gaze turned cold, and his voice seemed to raise a few octaves as he said, "But thanks to you, I have already stayed here for 34 years. Dongfang Tao frowned and said, "Don't talk nonsense, you have sent someone to pass a message to me this time. What is the urgent matter?" After a pause, he suddenly snorted and said, "Also, in the future, if you want to find someone to pass a message to, don't look for he, I don't like that person." Seeing that the corpse did not immediately answer him and instead looked Dongfang Tao up and down, he then laughed coldly and said, "You have become Yuanying Zhenren, so you immediately put on airs, huh? Is it that even if I want to find you in the future, I may not be able to summon you?" A trace of impatience flashed across Dongfang Tao's face, and he said, "If you have something to say, then say it, don't bring up old scores, and I will say it again." He stared at the corpse, and his voice also seemed to become a few degrees colder and said, "Don't talk to me like it's all thanks to me, you have only yourself to blame for this ending of yours, junior brother." Chapter 178. Lu Chen walked in front of the tree and carefully looked at it for a while. Then, he suddenly stretched out his hand and gently stroked the tree trunk. The rough tree bark felt as rough as a rock as it brushed past his palm. The surroundings were still silent, but Lu Chen's eyes became brighter and brighter. His fingers moved slower and slower. After a while, when his fingers drew across a mottled crack, he suddenly stopped. The dry and cracked bark appeared dark brown at his fingertips. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and gently pressed down on it again. Gradually, a fine crack appeared in the dark bark. With the movement of his fingers, the crack continued to expand until it became a piece of bark the size of a palm. It suddenly shook and then fell from the tree trunk. With a clatter, the piece of bark gently fell to the ground. Lu Chen didn't take a closer look. He just stared at the exposed trunk behind the piece of bark. On the smooth wood, someone had used a sharp blade to carve out a simple but twisted pattern. There was a thick line and several thin lines of different lengths and thicknesses. At first glance, it looked like random graffiti. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that when these twisted lines were put together, they looked like a tree. The big tree. The corners of Lu Chen's mouth slowly curled into a smile. He stared closely at the incomparably secretive pattern, as if he wanted to commit it to memory. After a while, he flipped his right hand, and a black dagger appeared in his hand. Then, a black light flashed, and with a slash, he directly chopped off the piece of wood with the pattern carved on it. Then he turned around and called out to Atsu. He quickly walked out of the forest without looking back. When Lu Chen returned to the Fian platform, he saw a pretty figure standing in front of him. At first, Lu Chen thought it was Su Qingjun, but he soon realized that something was wrong. When he took a few steps forward, he found that it was Exen. The black dog let out a happy bark and ran forward. Exen smiled and squatted down, hugged Atsu, and patted it vigorously. Atsu also happily jumped around her. After a while, Lu Chen came up and said with a smile, "Why did you come today?" Exen touched Atsu's head, then stood up and said to Lu Chen with a smile, "It's rare that I have time. I haven't seen you and Atsu for a long time, so I came to see you." Lu Chen said, "It sounds like you've been very busy recently." Exen said, "Isn't it so? Since my master came out of seclusion, people have been coming here one after another. As his only disciple, I'm very tired from receiving guests all day long. But those who are related to my master are all people of status, so I can't take it lightly. It's tiring." Lu Chen laughed and said, "Don't complain. It's better than having no one to take care of you before." Exen giggled. Lu Chen looked around and saw that the Fian platform was empty. The cave in the distance was not open, and the stone door was closed. He asked Exen, "Did you not see your sister Su when you came here?" Exen said, "No, I just came here not long ago. Sister Su hasn't come out yet, so I didn't dare to disturb her." Lu Chen nodded and said, "It's fine. Come sit with me." With that, he led Exen to the wooden house that he had built not long ago. After entering the wooden house, Exen looked around curiously. She saw that most of the house was made of wood, including the walls, tables, chairs, and beds. It was just that it had not been painted, so the whole house looked very rough, but at the same time, it exuded a natural fragrance of trees. Looking at Xianxia's expression, Lu Chen said with a smile, "What's wrong? You've never seen a house like this before, right?" Xian nodded and said, "Yes, it's really the first time I've seen it. Did you build this all by yourself, Brother Lu?" "That's amazing," Xian praised from the bottom of her heart. Lu Chen burst into laughter and pulled over a wooden chair for Xian to sit on. He said casually, "I just chopped some wood and tied it together. It's nothing to be surprised about." Xian laughed, and then suddenly seemed to think of something. Her face turned serious, and a sly look flashed in her eyes. She said to Lu Chen seriously, "Well, I came here today because I have another thing to inform you." "So formal. Is it something important?" Lu Chen asked curiously. Xian coughed and said, "I can't call you Brother Lu anymore." "But why?" Lu Chen asked. "You see," Xian said seriously, "Sister Su and I have always been on the same level. But now that you have become Sister Su's nominal disciple, you have to call her master, right? Then when you see me, do you have to call me martial uncle?" Lu Chen was stunned for a moment, and then he laughed and scolded, "Well, now you actually know how to take advantage of me." Xian snorted and said, "What advantage? If you dare not call Sister Su master, then I won't let you call me martial uncle." Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "What are you talking about? Su Qingjun is younger than me by a few years. How can I call her master? No way, no way." Xian laughed and said, "You can say that behind my back. When Sister Su really comes, let's see if you dare to admit it." Lu Chen said righteously, "A man won't call her master if I say I won't. Your threats are useless." Xian covered her mouth and giggled. She looked very happy. Looking at her appearance, Lu Chen also felt that his mood seemed to be a lot better. He smiled and said to her, "Didn't you say you were very busy? Why are you free today?" "Oh, my master went out to meet an old friend today, so I am free." Xian stretched and then leaned on the rough bed without any taboo. With a satisfied smile, she said, "It's still more comfortable here, Brother Lu." You don't know that in the Threezhong Peak Cave residence, my face is sore from smiling all day long. Those people I know and don't know have to greet me with a smile. It's really 10 times more tiring than cultivating. Lu Chen jokingly scolded, "You really don't know how lucky you are. Still, it's quite annoying to see so many people every day. In the future, you can come over to my place to play whenever you're free. When I'm not around, you can chat with that big sister of yours." Xian shrugged and said, "It's fine if I want to chat with you. It won't disturb you. But Sister Su is a genius who is the focus of attention. She must seize the time to cultivate all day long. I don't dare to disturb her." Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "Well, in fact, it's not completely like that. Your sister Su sometimes likes to have someone to chat with. Anyway, it's not a bad thing for you to be close to her." Lu Chen said with a smile, "It's just you know Sister Su quite well now." Lu Chen said with a smile, "It's just By the way, there are so many immortals and big shots on this mountain. Who is your master going to visit?" Xian said, "My master didn't tell me. He just said goodbye to me and left. Sigh, he usually tells me where he's going." Probably thinking of this difference, Xian was a little depressed. Lu Chen saw that this girl's mood was so easily fluctuating and found it funny. He casually said some jokes and in the blink of an eye, he made Xian happy. The two chatted and laughed for a while. Seeing that it was getting late, Xian got up and said goodbye. Lu Chen saw her to the side of the mountain road and watched her go. But after a while, Xian suddenly turned back and said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, there is something I want to tell you." Lu Chen saw that her expression was a little serious and didn't seem to be joking. He was a little surprised and said, "What's wrong?" Xian said, "Before my master went out this time, someone came to visit him. It was He Shixiang." Lu Chen's face sank and said, "He Gang's big brother?" Lu Chen could understand why Xian's face didn't look too good at the moment. After all, He Gang's matter was like a nightmare to her. It was a past that she really didn't want to recall. And He was He Gang's big brother. He Gang was directly driven out of Kunlun Mountain because of that matter. No matter how he looked at it, he and Exen were like fire and water. And Exen was Dongfang Tao's only disciple. Obviously, Dongfang Tao and he couldn't go together. But this matter happened like this. There was obviously something strange in it. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "What did they say that day? Did you hear it?" Exen thought for a moment and said, "I was at the side most of the time, but they said some polite words, nothing important. Later, when they were almost finished, I packed up the tea set and left for a while. I saw the two of them say a few more words, but I didn't hear the rest." Lu Chen frowned and didn't say anything for a moment. Xian looked a little worried. She was full of thoughts and said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, what do you think they talked about? My master, he couldn't have been moved by Xianxia, right?" Lu Chen looked at the young girl and sighed in his heart. Xian's good days today could be said to be almost entirely due to her receiving Dongfang Tao's appreciation. Dongfang Tao also unexpectedly broke through the great life and death juncture and became enlightened Yuaning. If Dongfang Tao was bewitched by He and had some opinions about Exin, then it could be said to be a disaster for her. No wonder she was not calm at all. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said to Exin, don't be anxious. In my opinion, this matter shouldn't be as bad as you think." He paused for a moment and said, "If you are still worried, I will think of a way to help you find out about He's recent movements." "Yes." Exin nodded heavily, a trace of a smile on her face. Although she knew that Xixiang and Lu Chen's cultivation and strength were worlds apart, but for some reason, when Lu Chen said he would help her, Xian almost unconsciously believed him. What he said, he would definitely be able to do. Xian thought like this and her mood immediately improved. Chapter 179. "I'll go down the mountain tomorrow," Lu Chen said to Su Qingjun, who was standing not far away, as he sat on the ridge of the field with his back against a big tree. It was already dusk. Su Qingjun had stayed in the cave for a day and would come out to walk around at this time. It was a relatively fixed habit for her these days. Lu Chen didn't know if she had this habit when she lived alone on the Fian Terrace, but under normal circumstances, dusk was a fixed time for him to chat with this woman. Most of the time, it was relatively relaxing. Speaking of which, perhaps it was because she had made a big fuss when she returned to the Su family a while ago, which frightened the family. So these days, the Fian Terrace was unusually quiet. Often, no one came up for a few days. Occasionally, some people came over, but they were some friends of Su Qingjun from the Kunlun party. No one from the Su family came. Su Qingjun didn't have much of a reaction to this, at least in front of Lu Chen. These days, she looked very calm, but no one knew what this woman was thinking in the depths of her heart. Lu Chen wouldn't ask anything. After Su Qingjun made a big fuss in the Su family and returned to the mountain, the two of them quickly stopped talking about this matter. But compared to before, their relationship was undoubtedly much closer. Even Su Qingjun could joke with Lu Chen more casually in private. At this moment, Su Qingjun smiled and asked Lu Chen, "What are you going to do? I see that you're very free recently. How about growing more spiritual herbs in the spiritual field?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "I'm going to go down the mountain for a walk. In addition, I know some small things that you definitely haven't seen before. I'll bring some back for you to broaden your horizons." Su Qingjun was only joking at first, but her curiosity was piqued after hearing Lu Chen's explanation. She asked, "What is it? It sounds very interesting." Lu Chen smiled and said, "You'll know when I bring it back. I'll come to see you tomorrow night." Okay. The next morning, Lu Chen got up and went down the mountain with the black dog. Now that he was a nominal disciple of Jin Dan Friar, his identity was different. He was no longer as embarrassed as before. Dogs were valued by their owners. Recently, Atsu could also follow Lu Chen to wander around openly, ignoring the original rule of the Kunlun party that no one could keep a dog casually. The dog raised by the disciple of the genius Jin Dan, how could it be an ordinary dog? On the way down the mountain and into Kunwa City, Lu Chen didn't rush to find Old Ma in the secluded alley. Instead, he took Atsu to wander around the street. Along the way, he bought a lot of meat and bones for Atsu. He put them in a bag and carried them all the way to Black Hill Pavilion to feed Atsu. This made Atsu greedy. Along the way, it drooled and stared at the bag in Lu Chen's hand. It couldn't see anything else. Then, Lu Chen wandered around the street for a while and bought a few things before he took Atsu back to Black Hill Pavilion. After entering the house and going to the small courtyard in the back, Lu Chen scattered the meat and bones on the ground in a corner. Atsu immediately roared and rushed over to pounce on the food like a fierce dog, chewing loudly. At the side, Old Ma was amused and said with a smile, "This guy must have been starving on the mountain. Why is he eating like this? It's like he hasn't eaten anything in 8 lifetimes." Lu Chen chuckled and said, "It's living a very comfortable life, so you don't need to worry about it. How about I leave it with you and you take care of it?" Old Ma immediately waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. I can't afford to take care of this dog." The two of them sat facing each other. Old Ma looked at him and said, "It hasn't been long since you went down the mountain. Why did you come back? Besides, there are many people from the Su family in this city. Aren't you afraid of another accident?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "The Su family won't dare to court disaster again. It's fine." Old Ma said with a smile, "You sound so sure. It seems you have a card up your sleeve." Lu Chen snorted and said, "In any case, the Su family is an old aristocratic family that has been entrenched in Kunwu City for many years. There must be a few people in the family who understand the situation. With the current situation, anyone with the slightest bit of knowledge knows that the Su family will rely on Su Qingjun the most in the future. Not everyone is as stupid as those wastes and that Madame Bai." Old Ma nodded and said, "You're right. If I were a member of the Su family, the most important thing right now would be to ease the relationship with eldest Miss Su as soon as possible and use their blood relationship to move her. The more we do, the more mistakes we'll make. It'd be best if we didn't do anything." There was some regret on Lu Chen's face. He said, "That's right. I originally thought I'd draw out a few more wastes today and see if I could use this opportunity to stir up trouble and sow discord between Su Qingjun and that family. Unfortunately, there really are people with discerning eyes. I wasted my time walking around the streets." Old Ma sneered and said, "You're too evil. You want to destroy the Su family from the root." Lu Chen sneered but didn't say anything. "Right, there's one more thing. If you have time, can you help me pay attention to He Yi's recent movements and see if there's anything strange?" Lu Chen said to Old Ma. Old Ma frowned and his eyes seemed to suddenly look a little strange. He looked at Lu Chen and asked, "Why are you suddenly concerned about this person?" Lu Chen didn't hide it and casually repeated what Xian had said to him. In the end, he said, "I've always felt that this He is a little strange." Last time, he was clearly forced into seclusion, but after a period of time, he was suddenly released for no reason. It seems that he's been wandering around the Kunlun party recently and seems to be meeting people everywhere. Old Ma's eyes flashed and he didn't say anything. Lu Chen noticed his expression and said, "What's wrong?" Old Ma looked at him meaningfully and said, "You're right. He is indeed strange. Do you remember I told you last time that someone was investigating the matter of the cinnabar?" "I remember. What did you find?" Lu Chen asked. Old Ma laughed coldly and said, "The person who was investigating was He Gang." Lu Chen's expression changed slightly and he sat up a little straighter. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly said, "But you said before that the person who investigated this matter showed a token of the Kunlun party to some big shops?" "That's right." Lu Chen's eyes slowly lit up and he said, "But He Gang has clearly been chased out of the sect by the Kunlun party?" "That's right." Old Ma had a faint smile on his face and said, "In other words, he shouldn't have this kind of thing." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma and said slowly, "But he has it and showed it to others. The person who could give him this kind of token. It can only be He Yi." Lu Chen fell silent and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face as if he had thought of more things. After a moment he said in a low voice, "In other words, the person who wanted to investigate the cinnabar matter was He Yi himself. It was just that he couldn't do it himself, so he sent He Gang to do it." Old Ma nodded and said, "That's right. He Gang did this secretly. It took me a lot of effort to confirm that it was him." Lu Chen's eyes grew brighter and brighter as he said in a low voice, The cinnabar is usually not important, but recently it is related to a murder case of the Devil sect on the Kunlun mountain. He suddenly came out of seclusion and intervened in this matter, so the reason why he was suddenly released. The corner of his mouth slowly showed a hint of a smile, but it was not gentle and carried a hint of coldness. After looking at Old Ma pointed a finger at him with an indifferent expression. He's coming for you. I didn't expect that there would be someone secretly pursuing me on the Kunlun mountain. This feeling. Lu Chen clicked his tongue. Old Ma squinted at him and said, "What's so strange about it? Haven't you been like this for so many years? You should be used to it, right?" "Well, you're right." Lu Chen nodded and said, "But since we know this person's purpose, it's all the more important that we investigate him." He looked at Old Ma. Old Ma nodded and said, "Don't worry, leave it to me." Good. After saying these words, both of them breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. At the same time, there was a faint hint of excitement on their faces. For the shadow hiding in the dark, discovering such a secret might have a different feeling. "Hey, I see that you're in good spirits recently," Old Ma said to Lu Chen with a smile. Lu Chen said, "Yes, I'm busy with revenge. There are so many debts to collect. If I don't be in good spirits, how can I finish it?" Old Ma glanced at him and said, "No, I feel that you're not the same as before. When you were a shadow, you always looked bitter and hateful all day, as if you would turn hostile and kill people at the slightest disagreement. But it's different now." Lu Chen was startled and said, "What do you mean by that?" Old Ma stared at him and said, "These days, I always feel that you seem to be more cheerful than before. Has your temperament changed? Or is there someone on the Kunlun mountain that made your mood better?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Suddenly, a strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Then he suddenly laughed and scolded Old Ma with a smile, "T. I'm a shadow, and there are thousands of incarnations. How can you see through me? How do you know that what I showed you before wasn't fake, and that what you see now is real?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Well, what you said makes sense. Sometimes, I really can't see through you. But look at yourself. Aren't you tired of living like this?" He smiled and said to Lu Chen, "There's only the two of us here. Just relax. Otherwise, if you keep pretending, I'm afraid that you'll go crazy in the future. Go to hell. I won't go crazy even if you go crazy." Lu Chen scolded. Old Ma laughed and walked to the side to tease Atsu, who was still eating. Lu Chen looked at his back, and the smile on his face gradually faded. Chapter 180. On the way back to the mountain, he brought Atsu, whose belly seemed to have grown bigger and had almost swallowed all the meat and bones, back to the mountain. Along the way, he could only hear the dog's burps. The weather was clear in the afternoon. The scenery in Kunlun Mountain was quiet and beautiful. The forest was green and the trees were undulating. Occasionally, 1 or 2 waterfalls could be seen, making people walking on the mountain road feel like they were in a fairyland. In the blessed land of Spirited Mountain, spirit chi seemed to be everywhere. There were not many people on the mountain road. Because this place was within the mountain gate of Kunlun Mountain, all one could see were Kunlun disciples. There were all kinds of people, but almost all of them were chi refining and foundation establishment disciples. After all, most of the odd job disciples had a lot of things to do, so it was impossible for them to be so leisurely. Therefore, in comparison, Lu Chen was a bit conspicuous. Fortunately, there were not many people. Secondly, most of the cultivators were too lazy to meddle in other people's business, so no one paid attention to him. After walking like this for a while, Lu Chen suddenly saw a person walking on the opposite mountain road in front of him. Several people in the same direction in front of Lu Chen, whether they were foundation establishment disciples or chi refining disciples, after seeing that person, almost all of them immediately nodded and smiled to greet him. In the voice that floated with the wind, he could also clearly hear the words, "Senior brother he," and so on. Lu Chen's footsteps stopped. He looked ahead and watched the person get closer. Gradually, he could see that handsome and determined face clearly. After a moment, he stood on the side of the road with his head slightly bowed. When that person passed by him, he calmly called out like the others, "Senior brother he." When passing by Luchin, He's footsteps slightly slowed down. He turned his head to look at the inconspicuous odd-job disciple standing on the side of the road. He nodded to him and then continued to walk forward. A wind blew from the forest and made a small whirl between the two of them. It blew up a fallen leaf, floated up and fell down, rolling and floating into the distance. Peace returned to the mountain path. Luchin stood where he was for a while. When the other Kunlun disciples had gone far away, only the black dog was still squatting beside him. Luchin glanced at Atsu and suddenly said, "Since we've met and we have nothing to do anyway, why don't we go and take a look?" Atsu tilted his head, looking a little confused. Luchin turned around and walked in another direction. He had walked this path before, but now he was far away. However, Luchin was not in a hurry to catch up. Instead, he walked slowly. By his side, Atsu was running a few steps in front of him. He sniffed the ground lightly and then jogged forward. Just like that, Luchin followed Atsu, walking and walking. After walking for a long time, looking at the surrounding mountain terrain, Luchin suddenly frowned. This was because the mountain path in this direction was getting more and more desolate, and there were no signs of accommodation. As they went deeper, even human footprints became rare. Weeds began to appear on the road, exuding a desolate aura. After walking for a while, with Atsu's unusually sensitive nose leading the way, Luchin had walked a long distance on this secluded mountain path. Then he suddenly saw the nameless mountain in front of him, hidden under the tall mountain range, mostly shrouded in shadows. Although it was very far away, a very strong gloomy aura still came over. Luchin's expression changed slightly, then he looked forward. In the distance, he could only vaguely see a blurry back of Hei, who seemed to be walking alone into the dark side of the nameless mountain. There was a condensed darkness there, as if it had swallowed Hei's figure in an instant, and nothing else could be seen. Luchin glanced at the mountain terrain on his left and right, and finally his eyes fell on the nameless mountain. After a while, he muttered to himself, "I didn't expect there to be such a dark place in the mountains of Kunlun. It shouldn't be." He looked a little surprised and a little confused, but he quickly calmed down again, ready to take a step forward. But before he took a step forward, he suddenly thought of something and looked back at Atsu. The black dog was sitting quietly on the ground behind him, and when Luchin looked over, it even wagged its tail gently. Luchin pondered for a moment, walked over, squatted down, and patted Atsu's head, saying, "There should be some bad things in the field in front, don't go there." It was not clear if Atsu understood him, but it just looked up at Luchin, barked twice, and then stuck out its tongue to lick Luchin's palm. Luchin smiled, and his smile seemed to be the most gentle of the day. He reached out and hugged Atsu's head, then patted its head and said in a low voice, "Go and play by yourself. Wait for me here, or when it gets dark, go to the Flying Goose Terrace to sleep. Do you understand?" Atsu barked, then got up and walked to the side of the mountain path, looking back at Luchin from time to time. Luchin smiled at it, and waited until Atsu ran into the forest next to the mountain and disappeared before he slowly turned around and looked at the darkness behind the mountain again, a silent look on his face again. After a moment, he walked forward quietly until he reached the edge of the darkness, and then, like a drop of water falling into the sea, his figure disappeared into the depths of the darkness without any movement. Atsu ran and played in the forest, breathing the fresh air, jumping up and down, sometimes beating the birds, sometimes digging holes in the ground, playing very freely, and seemed to have forgotten its owner. Unknowingly, it had walked a long way in the forest, and came to a small valley in the forest that was sunken and covered with white granite. Atsu was a dog, and for a long time, it was only interested in food, and didn't care much about other things like stones and trees. It had the same reaction to this white stone valley, and slowly walked past the side of the valley, looking like it was going to continue running forward. But at this moment, a beautiful little girl's face suddenly appeared on the largest white rock in the valley. She looked at Atsu and suddenly smiled, then lay on the largest rock, waved at Atsu, and shouted, "Come here." When Atsu turned his head to look, he saw a little girl of about 10 years of age. Although she was young, her temperament was different from others. Now, there was a faint aura of superiority about her. This beautiful girl was, of course, White Lotus. Atu stood where he was, looking a little surprised, but also a little wary. It seemed surprised to see White Lotus in this remote corner, but it didn't seem to lower its guard. However, White Lotus didn't seem to hate this black dog. Instead, she waved at Atsu and said with a smile, "Stupid dog, why don't you come over?" Atsu hesitated for a moment, but still slowly walked over. As Atsu approached, the smile on White Lotus's face was first shocked, then slowly disappeared, and her face became a little gloomy. She saw the wounds on Atsu's body, as well as the missing eye and half of its tail. Everything seemed to tell her that something terrible had happened to this dog. Atu slowly walked to the bottom of the huge rock, then raised his head to look at White Lotus. In a flash, White Lotus slowly fell from the top of the rock, landing not far from Atsu. What happened? White Lotus looked at Atsu's appearance, frowned, and asked Atsu. Atsu responded with a bark, but it seemed that no one could understand it. This made Atsu look a little depressed and disappointed. However, White Lotus's eyes fell on the terrible wounds on Atsu's body again, and murmured, "It seems that the blood of the Sirius in your body is very good. You can still survive after being tortured like this." She slowly squatted in front of Atsu, and Atsu instinctively took a step back. From the beginning to the end, Atsu looked at White Lotus with a trace of fear and wariness. Something's not right. Suddenly, White Lotus opened her mouth. She stared at Atsu as if she had found something strange. After pondering for a while, she suddenly said in a low voice, "How is it possible? It seems there is the smell of blood food." She reached out a hand and slowly placed it on Atsu's head. Atsu's body was a little tense, but it still obediently lay on the ground, showing a submissive posture. White Lotus seemed to be very satisfied with this, and she had no intention of making things difficult for Atsu. Her expression was focused on thinking, and after a while, she said to herself, "On this mountain of Kunlun, there is actually a second person who knows the secret method of blood food? Who is that person?" She lowered her head, stared at Atsu's eyes, and suddenly asked. Her voice sounded a little cold, but Atsu suddenly stood up from the ground after a moment of silence. It looked at White Lotus and suddenly let out a low growl from its throat. It was like a ferocious beast that had been provoked and angered, and it slowly bared its snow-white fangs at White Lotus. White Lotus looked at Atsu's actions and suddenly smiled. "Beasts will be beasts. No matter how talented they are, aren't they still stupid? I know this person." She reached out her hand and patted Atsu's head. Atsu turned its head to the side, wanting to dodge, but it only felt its vision blur. White Lotus's palm still touched its head, and it happened to press down on its head. White Lotus's brows relaxed, and she gently flicked her fingers. Gradually, white smoke floated out from between her fingers. It carried a strong chill, and it evaporated in the air like the coldest ice cube. Snow Wind Sutra. This was the unique secret method of the Kunlun party's Dongfeng, the soul formation perfected Lord by Chen. Atsu seemed to have sensed something, and it immediately lay down, not daring to move recklessly. White Lotus smiled, nodded, and said, "It seems that you are still smart. Is this also the Sirius bloodline? But I'm a little curious. Why didn't the secret method of blood food make you, a beast, go crazy? This doesn't seem reasonable. Let me take a closer look." Chapter 181. The back of the nameless mountain had always been dark, even during the day. After Lu Chen walked into the darkness, he felt that the surrounding temperature seemed to have suddenly dropped a lot. At the same time, a gust of cold wind blew continuously from the front, as if the terrible palm of a Yin spirit was caressing his flesh and skin. Lu Chen was not too surprised by this. This was just one of the common scenes in the shadowy land. For ordinary people, it was terrifying. For ordinary cultivators, perhaps it was a little troublesome because it was rare, but for him, it was already a common sight. He seemed to have a natural ability to blend into the darkness. In this shadow, he was like a fish in the water, silently moving forward, not revealing any traces. Not long after, Lu Chen saw the black house. The black door was open at the moment, and He Yi's figure could be vaguely seen standing in the courtyard. Lu Chen hid in a dark corner, looking over there for a while, and then his eyes fell on the plaque above the black door with the words, "Righteous Grave." He frowned slightly. He could roughly guess what these 2 words meant, but he really did not think that there would be such a thing in the Kunlun party that seemed to only exist in the mortal world. And looking at the surroundings again, the yin qi was dense, and the darkness was surging. Lu Chen quickly judged that the core of this yin land should be in that courtyard. Righteous Grave, as the name suggested, should be a place where the dead would come. Ordinary people would not come here at all. Even for a shadow like Lu Chen who used to walk in the dark, he would not easily set foot in this kind of place. No one liked this place, or rather, as long as it was a living creature, it would not like this kind of dense yin qi place. Therefore, since ancient times, the yin land was one of the dangerous places. Then there was only one question left: what was he doing here? If there were no other accidents, Lu Chen would probably have thought of an answer in his heart. He stood in a dark corner and quietly looked at the black courtyard. He thought to himself, so Xianxia's body was placed here after he died? Just as he was deep in thought, a cold aura suddenly floated out from the courtyard, like a venomous snake hiding in the darkness suddenly spitting out its tongue, like a sleeping evil spirit suddenly opening its eyes. A skinny figure walked out from the darkness, silently appearing behind standing in front of the black door. A bone-chilling wind suddenly blew. His cold gaze swept through the darkness. He looked at the shadowy corner. The cold wind swept over, blowing up a few withered leaves. In the darkness, there seemed to be a storm and undercurrent surging. However, after a while, only a few withered leaves fluttered in the sky and then slowly floated down. There was nothing in that dark corner. Other than darkness, it was as if nothing had ever existed. The zombie's cold gaze swept over the place. When he saw the empty and lonely darkness, a trace of extreme astonishment seemed to flash across the depth of his eyes. At this moment, a figure walked over and stood not far behind him. It was he. He too glanced outside but did not see anything. Hence, he frowned and asked the zombie, "Senior, what's wrong?" The zombie did not answer him. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "Did you come to see me alone?" He nodded and said, "Yes." The zombie grunted and didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked back into the dark courtyard. The black gate behind him moved on its own without any wind and slowly closed up, hiding all the darkness and secrets behind it once again. The darkness outside the courtyard was as quiet as the deep sea. After an unknown period of time, in another dark corner not far from the corner, a slight tremor suddenly came from the ground. Then, as if the darkness was disintegrating, a figure slowly emerged from the darkness. It was Lu Chen. At the moment, his face looked a little cold. When he looked at the courtyard again, his gaze was completely different from before. Atsu was lying on the ground, looking at White Lotus beside him with a vigilant gaze. The little girl, who had an otherworldly beauty, was showing a faint smile at the moment. Her fair, jade-like fingers were softly brushing over the black fur on Atsu's back. Specks of tiny, translucent, crystal-like white shards floated up and dispersed on her fingertips, forming a sharp contrast with Atsu's shiny black fur. Under the white and cold radiance, faint wisps of aura lightly touched Atsu's skin. Some bounced back and some seeped in. Gradually, the smile on White Lotus's face vanished. In its place was a doubtful expression, as if she had discovered something extremely strange that she did not expect. After a while, she stopped brushing her fingers, and the snow-like powder also disappeared. Atsu raised its head and glanced at her. Seeing that White Lotus did not seem to have any other strange expression, it inched forward a little and then crept up quietly. White Lotus saw all of Atsu's movements, but for some reason she did not stop it. In her bright and clear eyes, the figure of the black dog was reflected, but her gaze seemed to be looking further away. No, this is not the blood-feeding secret technique. Blood-feeding secret technique is so overbearing. Once the technique is cast, even if the body doesn't explode and die, it will at least end up in a frenzy. How could it still be like you? White Lotus stared at Atsu, as if she had seen something unbelievable. She murmured, "But in this dog's body, there are clearly traces of blood feeding. What is going on?" Could it be that in this world, there is another kind of technique that has the same origin as blood feeding, but is stronger than the blood feeding secret technique? If this is the case, then the hundreds of thousands of lives that the southern barbarians have lost for thousands of years are just a big joke. White Lotus suddenly stood up. For some reason, her beautiful face was flushed with excitement as she stared at Atsu. Atsu was inexplicably afraid and took a step back. Luchin. White Lotus chuckled softly. Her voice sounded a little erratic. She said, "Interesting, interesting. Luchin, who are you?" Luchin rushed back to Flying Goose Terrace before dusk. Atsu was delayed for a while. After he came out of the dark grave, he whistled for a while, and Atsu ran back from the forest. On the way back, Atsu didn't seem to be in a very good mood, but other than that, there seemed to be nothing unusual. There was no pain or injury. Luchin was also thinking about the strange figure in the dark grave, so he didn't pay too much attention to Atsu. However, when walking on the mountain road of Flying Goose Terrace, both Luchin and Atsu seemed to have adjusted their emotions after walking for a while. Atsu began to run back and forth happily. Luchin also saw from afar a figure leisurely walking on Flying Goose Terrace in the light of the approaching dusk. For some reason, when he saw the quiet figure of the woman, Luchin felt a lot better. He smiled and waved at Su Qingjun from afar, calling out to her. When Su Qingjun heard his voice, she looked back and smiled. When dusk arrived, the golden sunlight spread over the vast sea of white clouds, dyeing the clouds as far as the eye could see a beautiful golden color. The black dog ran happily on the Flying Goose platform. The two of them stood on the flat ground by the cliff, their shadows forming a long shadow. "You're back," Su Qingjun said to Luchin. "You really went for a whole day." Luchin smiled and said, "Yes. The journey back and forth wasn't short. Plus, I went to many places in the city to buy a lot of things, so it was a little delayed. But at least I made it back in time." Su Qingjun glanced at the bag in his hand, and her eyes showed some curiosity. She said, "What is it? Why are you being so secretive?" Luchin chuckled and beckoned Su Qingjun to sit down beside a few rocks. He then took out something wrapped in paper from the bag he carried with him and handed it to her. Su Qingjun took it and felt a slight warmth in her palm. She glanced at Luchin, but Luchin smiled and did not say anything. He only gestured for her to open the paper and take a look. Su Qingjun stretched out her fingers and gently opened the paper. After lifting the 2 layers of thin paper, she saw what was inside. It was a small black ball, and at the same time, it gave off a strange smell of meat. A hint of surprise appeared on her face. She looked at Luchin and asked, "What is this?" "Roasted loach," Luchin said with a smile. "Try it, it's delicious." Su Qingjun was stunned and said, "This thing can be eaten?" Luchin said, "Don't be fooled by its black color. In fact, it's crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, and the meat inside is very delicious. I've been craving this thing since I was a child. Unfortunately, I didn't have the money to buy it at that time, so I drooled when I saw it." Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, and then frowned slightly. She said, "Loach is such a vulgar thing. It lives in dirty streams, and it has no spiritual power. Eating it has no benefit for cultivation. Why should we eat it?" "There's no reason." Luchin shrugged and looked at Su Qingjun with a gentle and smiling expression. He said, "It's just for the sake of delicious food. I think you don't have to do everything for the sake of cultivation, right?" "Is that so?" Su Qingjun seemed to be a little confused, but also somewhat moved. "Try it? It's a delicacy that only mortals and poor people can eat." Luchin looked at her, and for some reason, a strange emotion flashed in his eyes. He then smiled and said, "Eating whatever you want, living whatever life you want, isn't that the best?" Su Qingjun smiled, looked at him, and suddenly asked, "Then in your heart, do you want to live that kind of life?" "Of course. I really want to live a free life without being manipulated by others. I really want that." Luchin laughed. Chapter 182. That day, Su Qingjun tried the roasted loach out of curiosity. Unfortunately, she didn't get to taste the mouth-watering, lingering delicacy that Lu Chen mentioned. After frowning a few times, Su Qingjun put down these ugly and seemingly ordinary things. It doesn't seem to be to my liking. I don't think it's that delicious, Su Qingjun said to Lu Chen, feeling a bit embarrassed. Lu Chen looked at her and smiled. He also picked up the other roasted loach and took a few bites. After a while, he spat it out on the ground and said, It really doesn't taste good. Su Qingjun said with a smile, It's probably because you brought it all the way from Kunwa City to the mountain. It's such a long journey, so it's probably already cold. Also, it's not too fresh, so the taste is a bit bad. Next time we have a chance, we should find some freshly made roasted loach. Maybe it'll taste better. Lu Chen shook his head and said, It has nothing to do with that. I remember when I was a kid, I occasionally ate this thing. Even if it was overnight, I still ate it until my mouth watered. This roasted loach didn't change, it was me who changed. On the edge of the cliff on Flying Goose Terrace, there was a moment of silence. The two of them didn't say anything. In the distance, the black dog's snorts could be heard. It seemed like it had run into the forest and caught something, so it was happily playing around. After a while, Su Qingjun smiled and said to Lu Chen, In fact, isn't this a good thing? You've become a better person. It can't be that you want to go back to the bitter days you had when you were a kid, right? Lu Chen smiled and nodded. You're right. I've become a better person. He put away the snacks and said to Su Qingjun with a smile, I wanted to let you eat something you've never eaten before to broaden your horizons and tease you. In the end, I messed it up. I'm so embarrassed. I've made a fool of myself in front of you. Su Qingjun hurriedly said, No. In fact, I'm also very happy because I've never eaten or even seen these things before. She seemed to be lost in thought as she spoke. Late at night, the Flying Goose Terrace was silent. Su Qingjun had already returned to her cave. At this moment, she looked at the stone wall and saw only a patch of moonlight shining on the smooth stone, reflecting the cold radiance. The wooden house where Lu Chen lived was on the other side of Flying Goose Terrace, and it was closer to the edge of the cliff. At this moment, the moonlight fell on the wooden house and shone through the open window. It was late at night, but Lu Chen was still awake. Atsu was lying by his feet, curled up into a ball and asleep. Ever since it was seriously injured, whenever Atsu slept, as long as Lu Chen was by his side, it would definitely snuggle up to him. Lu Chen tried to chase it off the bed a few times, but Atsu would cling to him tenaciously every time. In the end, Lu Chen let it be. The night was bleak and the moonlight was cold. He put his hand behind his head as a pillow. His eyes were bright as he stared at the moonlight outside the window. He always seemed to be like this. In the dark night, as long as he didn't sleep, he would be abnormally awake. The bright moon hung high in the night sky and was reflected in the depths of his eyes. It was like the shadow of the moon floating in the dark sea, faintly changing with a strange luster. Lu Chen looked at the bright moon. At this moment, the shape of the moon was no longer that of a full moon. Instead, it was slightly thinner. He calculated the time in his mind and then said to himself in a low voice, There are still 24 days. In another 24 days, it would be the night of the next full moon. That day, in that mysterious forest, he found the mysterious pattern hidden under the bark of the tree, which revealed a code mark that only a few people in this world could understand. Meeting on the night of the full moon. That was the most simple meaning of it. It was an invitation from the depths of the darkness. Lu Chen understood it and received it. He didn't know whether it was good or bad, and he didn't know whether it was good or bad. All he could do was wait. Moreover, he didn't even tell Old Ma about this matter. What would happen on the night of the next full moon? He silently looked at the moon. After a while, he suddenly got up and closed the window. On this day, he went down the mountain and went straight to Kunwa City to find the place where He Gang lived. The two brothers chatted in the room for a while. He Gang told his big brother about his harvest from the search for Wuxia. In the end, he said with a bit of shame, Big brother, I'm really useless. I spent so much time and effort, but I still didn't find any suspicious people. He didn't look angry. He shook his head and said, You don't need to think too much. This is all normal. The devil cult of the Three Realms has been opposing our righteous path's famous sects for many years and has been hunted down and annihilated countless times. If it wasn't for some dirty tricks, I'm afraid they would have been eliminated by our righteous path's seniors long ago. It doesn't matter if you can't find them. Xianxia carefully looked at him and said, "Big brother, from what you said, could it be that you have some harvest in other places? I'm just afraid that if this drags on for too long, your master and sect head will become a bit impatient." He said, "It doesn't matter. You don't need to worry about this. In fact, I've already told them about this matter. The devil cult spy who can do such a big thing this time must have an extremely high position in the devil cult, and his cultivation must also not be low. Therefore, it can be imagined that he's hiding very deeply. It's very difficult to find him in a short time." Regarding this, the two masters both nodded. Moreover, on the surface, they also pretended to gradually forget about this matter, but in fact, they might be secretly trying to lure that scoundrel out again. "It'd be great if we could really catch that scoundrel," Xianxia said hatefully. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. The Kunlun party has several thousand years of history. It won't let these scoundrels act so easily. Sooner or later, we'll catch them. At that time, I'll help you plead with the two masters. In consideration of this contribution, maybe they can let you return to the Kunlun party." Xianxia's body trembled. His ugly face revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. He suddenly stood up and said, "Really? Big brother, is this true?" He sighed and said, "You're my only younger brother. Why would I lie to you?" Xianxia was overjoyed. He nodded repeatedly. For a moment, he seemed to be so excited that he couldn't speak. It was easy to imagine how important the Kunlun party was in his heart. Ever since he was a child, ever since he was sensible, he followed his big brother into the Kunlun party. In his heart, Kunlun Mountain was his home. Apart from this, there was no other place. It was precisely because of this that when he was kicked out of the Kunlun party after that accident, Xianxia was completely disheartened and almost died numbly. Fortunately, in this world, he still had a big brother who loved him the most. Soon after, he chatted with Xianxia for a while and repeatedly warned him to be careful in Kunwa City. At least, before this important event, he shouldn't stir up any more trouble. Xianxia naturally agreed one by one. Soon after, he told He about what he had seen and heard in Kunwa City during this period of time. The most important part was the scene where the Su clan's matter changed. From what he said, Xianxia was very contemptuous of Su Qingjun. He indirectly hinted to his big brother that this woman was fickle and wasn't a good match for him. As for Lu Chen, this kind of unpresentable part-time disciple, Xianxia didn't even feel like saying his name for fear of polluting his big brother's ears. After listening to what he said, he shook his head and said, "Although my friendship with Su Qingjun isn't deep, I don't think she's that kind of person." Anxious, Xianxia promptly said, "Big brother, I saw it with my own eyes." He interrupted him and said while shaking his head, "You didn't see anything. It's just that Su Qingjun went back to the Su family. I know what to do about this matter. But for us brothers, Su Qingjun is just a passerby who has nothing to do with us. We don't need to curry favor with the Su family, but we also don't need to provoke them. Do you understand?" After a moment of silence, Xianxia nodded and said, "Okay." He looked at his younger brother and softened his voice. He said, "Xiaojing, I know you wholeheartedly want me to be well, but you don't have to be like this. We two brothers are actually the closest people in the world. To be honest, the only person I can trust with my life is you. I'll naturally deal with the other matters. You don't need to worry about me now. You just need to be yourself, okay?" Xianxia nodded and said, "Yes, I understand, big brother. Don't worry." He smiled and patted Xianxia's shoulder. He said, "When you return to Kunlun in the future, you and I will do great things together. The days ahead are still long. Who knows how far we can go in the future? Maybe we can even become the leader of Kunlun." Who knows? Xianxia laughed and nodded repeatedly. A trace of excitement flashed through his eyes. It was as if he was full of expectations and longing for the future. When he left, he did not make a sound. In order to not attract attention, he even changed into another set of clothes and covered his face. Then, He left He Gang's house from another direction. However, after he gradually walked away, an honest-looking man who was pulling a cart suddenly walked out from a corner on the long street behind him. His blank and empty eyes looked in the direction that he had left. Then, he turned around and walked in another direction. After about the time it took to drink a cup of tea, this man brought another person and stood in the same place. He first pointed at He Gang's house, then pointed at the long street that he had left from, and said a few words to him in a low voice. Standing beside him was a fat man. The fat man was Old Ma. Old Ma looked at the bustling street with people coming and going. He gently waved his hand. Then, the unremarkable man who was pulling the cart beside him retreated. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the sea of people like a drop of water. Old Ma pursed his lips. He turned his head. His gaze seemed to be a little cold as he looked at the house. After a moment he suddenly smiled again. His smile was cold. Chapter 183. The stars moved, the moon set, and the sun rose. Time passed quietly, and after a few more days, there were still 21 days until the next full moon. That morning, when Lu Chen opened the door and walked out of the wooden house, he saw a figure that he had not expected at all standing outside the house. He could not help but be surprised and said, "Why are you here?" On the flat ground of the Flying Goose platform, White Lotus was standing there, looking at the beautiful scenery around her, and said, "I did not expect this Flying Goose platform to have such scenery. It is really enviable. When will I be able to have such a cave abode?" Lu Chen snorted, walked over and stretched, then said, "Stop pretending. The strange peak you are on now is the real paradise, the immortals' secret realm. In the entire Kunlun party, only Yuan Yingzhenren has the right to set foot there. Would you care about a mere Flying Goose platform like this?" White Lotus smiled, and suddenly saw a black dog's head poking out from behind Lu Chen sneakily to look in their direction. White Lotus immediately laughed, and waved to Atsu as if she was very happy and said, "Atsu, come here." Atsu looked at White Lotus, and without a word, shrank back, and hid in the room with its tail between its legs, without the slightest hesitation. White Lotus was stunned, and looked a little awkward on the spot. After a moment, she slowly put down her hand, then laughed dryly and said to Lu Chen, "This black dog does not seem to like me very much." Lu Chen also laughed and said, "Although Atsu is stupid, sometimes it will have a flash of inspiration." White Lotus stared at him and said, "Are you mocking me?" Lu Chen did not intend to answer her, and only shrugged, then said, "Miss Bai, with your current status, I am afraid it is not appropriate for you to come to the Flying Goose platform so rashly, right?" Bai Lian said indifferently, "What's wrong with that? I don't think it's a big deal. Besides, although this is Su Qingjuan's residence, as long as I don't enter her residence, I can walk around the Flying Goose Terrace as I please. There's no way the Kunlun sect will forbid me from doing so." Of course, such a ban was impossible. The Flying Goose platform was beautiful, but it was really not a restricted area. It was just that most people in the sect respected Su Qingjun, so naturally they would not come here, so the Flying Goose platform became Su Qingjuan's private place. Of course, Lu Chen wouldn't argue with Bai Lian over this, so he simply waved his hand and said, "All right, don't waste your breath on me. Since you've come to the Soaring Goose Terrace, you must be looking for Su Qingjun, right? I will help you to call her." As he spoke, Lu Chen turned around, but a look of amusement flashed across his face. He thought to himself that it was still early. Once Su Qingjun was woken up, she would not be in a good mood. At that time, there might be a good show to watch. Unexpectedly, White Lotus stopped Lu Chen and said, "No need to go. I am not here to look for her. I am here to look for you." Lu Chen stopped in his tracks, and after a soft sigh, he turned around and looked at White Lotus. White Lotus looked at him with a smile that was not a smile, and there seemed to be some slyness in her expression. Lu Chen shook his head and walked over. At the same time, he softened his voice and said with a bitter smile, "I say, didn't we agree before that well water does not interfere with the river water does not interfere with the well water water does not interfere with the river water? You are now a noble disciple of a true monarch. and you also have a 5-pillar bone that is rarely seen in 1,000 years. With such a noble identity, the entire Kunlun party has to coax and flatter you. You suddenly came to find a useless odd-job disciple like me. What do you want me to do? If someone knows something, I am afraid that there will be countless people coming to investigate me tomorrow. White Lotus laughed and said, "Why, are you very afraid of being investigated?" Lu Chen asked in reply, "Then are you afraid?" White Lotus did not speak. After a while, Lu Chen said, "So, it is better for us not to have any contact. You live your good life, and I will drag out my life to be my odd-job disciple. Isn't that good for both of us?" White Lotus looked at him and said, "Originally, I also thought so. I have never been bothered to care about your matters. But there is one thing that I must ask you clearly." Lu Chen frowned and said, "What is it?" White Lotus stared at his eyes and said, "Do you know the blood-feeding technique that is passed down among the shamans of the southern barbarian tribes?" Lu Chen was startled, and then his eyebrows relaxed. It seemed that he had thought of many things in an instant, and also figured out the reason for White Lotus's sudden visit today. But on the surface, he still shook his head, and then replied with abnormal firmness, "I don't know." White Lotus pointed to the wooden house and said, "But I feel the traces of the blood-feeding technique from that dog." Lu Chen almost did not have the slightest hesitation, and directly said, "You are wrong." White Lotus looked at Lu Chen for a long time, and after a while, suddenly smiled and said, "I feel that you are becoming more and more interesting. It seems that you are hiding more secrets than me." Lu Chen's eyes flashed and said with a smile, "If that is the case, how about we make a deal? What do you say?" White Lotus' face that seemed to be innocent and flawless, at this moment, looked like the smartest and cunning fox in the world. Lu Chen said, "Secrets for secrets. You tell me a secret, and I will tell you a secret. This way, everyone will be comfortable. How about it?" White Lotus thought for a while and said, "I don't feel too good. You look honest and sincere, but in fact, you are full of evil tricks." It was only after White Lotus had left that Atsu seemed to suddenly breathe a sigh of relief, and its whole body relaxed. Lu Chen walked back to the wooden house and looked at Atsu. His eyes flickered slightly, as if he was lost in thought. For the rest of the day, it returned to its original peaceful state. Lu Chen did his own work, and then at dusk, Su Qingjun came out for a walk. The two of them stood by the cliff for a while, chatting, and then before the sky turned dark, they each said their goodbyes and returned to their own houses and caves. The night was very dark. There were no stars or moon, only the cold wind blowing coldly, as if it was the so-called dark and windy night. Lu Chen sat quietly in front of the window, looking at the dark sky amidst the rustling pines, until midnight. It was already late at night. Everything on earth seemed to have fallen asleep. Even the mountains had fallen into a deep slumber. In the wooden house, Atsu curled up at his feet, sleeping quietly, looking exceptionally at ease. Lu Chen quietly stood up. His whole body suddenly slanted. He did not even open the wooden door and just strangely slid out of the window, and then turned over and closed the window. Under the night sky, he blended into the darkness, drifting away into the distance. That mysterious evil sect spy had left a mysterious symbol on the big tree in that forest. Although Lu Chen could understand it and guessed that it meant to meet on the night of the next full moon, but before that he would not let go of other suspicious clues. Perhaps that symbol was just a trap with ulterior motives? Lu Chen, in his many years as a shadow, had long learned the instinct to not trust anyone. So when there were other suspicious points, he would not easily let it go. For example, that dark and mysterious righteous grave. Chapter 184. Before that day, Lu Chen had never known about this strange and mysterious place in Kunlun Mountain. Sometimes, when he thought about it, he felt that the martyr's grave really was a very strange place. In a famous sect like the Kunlun party, this kind of secular thing should not exist, but it did, and it seemed to have a very long history. In the past, Lu Chen had never heard a word or two about the martyr's grave from anyone. It seemed that everyone had ignored this place, just like the dusky shadow that always shrouded the area around the martyr's grave. The martyr's grave had always been out of people's sight. People did not know about it, but it had always existed. In fact, there were many similar things in the world. There were many people and things that we had never seen or heard of, so we thought that it was impossible. Even if we accidentally discovered something, we would certainly use our own imagination to speculate what that thing looked like. Of course, Lu Chen would not be like this. Compared to the vast majority of cultivators in the cultivation world, the current him might be weak on the surface, but his experience and knowledge, after seeing too many people and things, had long made him understand this truth. He was indeed surprised by the sudden appearance of the martyr's grave, but what he should do was not speculate, but carefully investigate. Abnormalities were demons, and the martyr's grave in Kunlun Mountain really seemed a bit too strange and abrupt. However, if it was really just a place that took in ownerless corpses, even if he had some doubts, he might not necessarily take the risk. The most important reason why he sneaked into the nameless mountain this night was of course because he saw he come here that day. He, this person, was now like a venomous snake hiding in the darkness, coldly and desperately searching for the whereabouts of the murderer. And coming to the martyr's grave must also be because he seemed to have discovered something here. What exactly did he obtain from the martyr's grave? Lu Chen was determined to get to the bottom of this. The Shadow's patience was certainly unquestionable, but no one could question the Shadow's ability to act. It was just like the battle in the desolate valley 10 years ago. No one had ever given him an order, and no one had ever told him what to do. However, at the most dangerous and critical moment, he had still acted decisively. His figure quickly moved forward in the darkness, but for some reason, perhaps because the night wind was too cold, he suddenly felt a chill in his chest. In the blink of an eye, it had been 10 years since he last saw her. That once beautiful face, along with the passage of time, seemed to be like all the memories in the world, gradually becoming blurry in his memory. The only thing that was still clearly engraved in his heart was her name. The curfew of the Kunlun party was an ancient rule. No one knew how many years it had lasted, including all the Yuanying Jinren. This rule had existed since the first time everyone climbed the Kunlun mountain. Perhaps it was really decided by Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo? But what was the point of setting a curfew? Lu Chen did not know. In fact, during his days on the Kunlun mountain, when night fell completely, he had secretly left his house several times and moved stealthily in the darkness. It was also because of this that he felt particularly confused about the curfew on the Kunlun mountain. Every time he sneaked out late at night, almost all the places he passed by at night on the Kunlun mountain did not have any thieves. Everyone was in awe of the Kunlun party. He had walked many times on those lonely mountain paths at night, but nothing had happened, and there was nothing strange or incomprehensible. The night in the Kunlun mountain was no different from the night in other places. Perhaps there was something strange about the occasional patrolling disciple? Then wasn't this curfew the most stupid rule? But all the disciples of the Kunlun sect still passed down this rule from generation to generation. It was not easy for Lu Chen to understand this, but he could shut his mouth and think about the era of the two patriarchs thousands of years ago. Every time it was late at night on the Kunlun mountain, some strange existences would run out and threaten the lives of the disciples of the sect. But now, thousands of years later, those dangers seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Or maybe they were just sealed and suppressed in the most mysterious, heaviest, and tightest place under the Kunlun mountain. Lu Chen, who was stealthily moving in the darkness, suddenly stopped. He stood in the shadows and frowned, as if he was thinking about something carefully. After a while, he suddenly turned around and looked into the distance. That direction was the deepest part of the Kunlun mountain range. There was also a legendary forbidden area there, which was the foundation of the Kunlun party. Even spiritual master Yuanying could not easily approach it. The only people who could control that dark area were the two peerless deity stage deity. Lu Chen's eyes gradually lit up. For a long time, everyone had been guessing what was in the forbidden area in the sky. This time, it seemed that Lu Chen had also thought of this. Lu Chen did not know what the evil sect spy saw in the Kunlun party, so it was very difficult to trace this person. But at this moment, he suddenly had a feeling that the spy came for a certain secret, and the biggest secret of the Kunlun mountain was probably what was in that forbidden area. One had to walk step by step, rice had to be eaten bite by bite. Even if there was a new suspicion in his heart, Lu Chen still came to the martyr's grave again. There was an extremely resourceful corpse watcher here. During the day, Lu Chen had already sensed that this person's skills were extraordinary, and he had actually almost found him. The reason why he insisted on coming to this unpleasant place was probably because he wanted to get some information from the corpse watcher. In the dark night, the martyr's grave seemed to be darker than during the day. There was a feeling of not being able to see the fingers of one's hand. The black courtyard was like a giant beast, silently lying in this boundless darkness. Lu Chen waited in the darkness for a long time and then slowly approached. But until he was near the tightly shut door, there was no movement in the black courtyard. Lu Chen was hesitating whether he should investigate further or not. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew past. The black door not far in front of him suddenly opened by itself. A candle lit up. It was the withered corpse watcher who suddenly came to the side of the door, holding a candle in his left hand. With the help of the flame, Lu Chen clearly saw this person's expression. He seemed to be a little cold and had no intention of talking to anyone. After looking around, he suddenly said faintly, "Please show yourself, esteemed guest. If there's nothing else, then I'll be going back to sleep." Lu Chen quietly watched the corpse's figure, hiding in the darkness. He did not say a word, even his breathing was quiet. The corpse watcher waited for a while, then turned around and walked back into the courtyard. The black door behind him closed with a creak. Lu Chen looked down at his own body. He did not find anything unusual, but he could not understand why he had fallen for this a few times in the past 2 days. The corpse watcher seemed to always be able to notice something was wrong in advance, but it seemed like he could not really pinpoint the enemy, so it was a little awkward. So now, should he go over? He stood in the darkness outside the righteous grave for 2 hours. He did not rashly walk forward. He only raised his head and looked out into the distance, looking at the majestic mountain peaks and the topography of this place. Before the 4th hour arrived, he suddenly turned around and left. At this time, the sky was still pitch black, but to be precise, another day had already passed. There were still 20 days until the next full moon. Lu Chen quietly left the righteous grave area, but what he did not know was that when he left, in the dark courtyard, the corpse watcher did not go to sleep like he said he would, but stood alone in the middle of the courtyard, as if he was listening to something. When Lu Chen left outside, the corpse watcher finally let out a sigh of relief. He raised his head to look at the sky, suddenly muttering to himself, "These few years, the Kunlun party has produced many geniuses. Their future is really limitless." Lu Chen took advantage of the night to leave, ready to rush back to Flying Goose platform before daybreak. Although it was unlikely that Su Qingjun would come out to patrol so early in the morning, that woman actually had a very strange and funny little quirk. She especially liked to sleep. On the night that Su Qingjun was seriously injured, Lu Chen had once entered her cave residence. Although later on, no matter who it was, he was very tight-lipped, saying that he had never entered her cave residence, but on that night, Lu Chen did see something that he should not have seen. Su Qingjun seemed to have a rather split personality. She was dignified and beautiful in front of others, but actually a little lazy in private. Lu Chen still clearly remembered that when he entered that day, he saw that the bed in Su Qingjun's cave residence was very clean, everything was very tidy. Only the quilt was not folded. When he thought of these things in his heart, he was secretly a little amused, but perhaps Su Qingjun had warned him, so he had always kept his mouth shut about this matter. But sometimes when he thought of it, he would still laugh, thinking that if Su Qingjun got married in the future, would she still be able to avoid her husband at that time? In the dark night, the wind was strong, and the mountain path was long, but his footsteps were light and quick. Suddenly, from an unknown place in the depths of the darkness, a strange sound came abruptly, like the mouth of a ferocious beast, but also like the sound of a hungry wolf drooling. Lu Chen's footsteps suddenly stopped. In the darkness ahead, in this quiet night of Kunlun Mountain that seemed to have been peaceful and quiet for thousands of years, there were 3 green lights in the shape of a triangle, as if there were 3 eyes on a head. Incomparably strange appeared in front of him. Chapter 185. In the darkness, the shape of the monster's body could not be seen clearly. Only those three strange green eyes stared intently at Lu Chen. At that moment, Lu Chen almost subconsciously thought of Atsu. In the past, in the middle of the night, Atsu's eyes also had a similar fire-like glow. But the two were different. Lu Chen quickly made this judgment. Although Atsu's eyes were green, the luster in them was clean and bright. Although it looked a little gloomy in the dark, one could still feel the change of emotion in them. There was that kind of vitality. The emerald green eyes that suddenly appeared in front of him were much stronger than Atsu's eyes. They were like three burning green flames that were filled with a brutal and cruel aura, as if there was only the intention to kill left. For some reason, after seeing this clearly, Lu Chen secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Then his face quickly sank. He frowned and looked at the strange monster that suddenly appeared in the dark. Of course, this thing was not a kind creature. Just the brutal aura that came from the dark was enough to make him categorize it as one of the most ferocious creatures he had ever seen in his life. Almost all the creatures that he had seen in the past were in the most dangerous places in this vast land of China, which was the depths of the land of chaos. But this place was clearly the Kunlun Mountain, the spiritual mountain of the Western land, the mountain base of the Kunlun party. How could there be such a ferocious monster? Many questions flashed in Lu Chen's mind, but he did not think too much about it. Because after the strange emerald green eyes confronted him for a moment, the monster seemed to be unable to suppress its desire for flesh and blood. It let out an ear-piercing shriek and suddenly rushed over. The sound of the monster breaking through the air was incomparably sharp, like an arrow that had been released from a bow. Because of the monster's movement, Lu Chen vaguely saw a little of the monster's appearance. It looked like a strange snake-like insect. It was half the length of an arm and its body was only as thick as a thumb. However, it had a strange head the size of a fist. The most eye-catching and most terrifying three green eyes were on the top of the monster's head. The whistling sound seemed to carry darkness with it as it rushed over. Lu Chen's face was as calm as still water. He took a step back and flipped his right palm. A black short sword appeared in his hand and he slashed it down. However, the strange insect's speed was so fast that it actually made a turn in midair and avoided the sharp blade. It even took advantage of the situation and flipped up from the blade. In an instant, it curled around Lu Chen's wrist. Then, it lowered its head and directly bit Lu Chen's wrist. These few movements were incomparably fast. The strange insect's speed was frighteningly fast, and Lu Chen couldn't react for a moment. He only felt a sudden sharp pain in his wrist, and at that moment he seemed to hear another kind of frightening sound. It was the sound of skin tearing and flesh scraping against bones. It was the sound of the terrifying strange insect devouring flesh and blood in a frenzy. Moreover, almost in an instant, the strange insect actually wriggled madly. Then, it directly drilled into the wound it had bitten, directly entering into Lu Chen's arm. A terrifying pain surged up from his arm like a tide. Lu Chen's palm trembled violently. At that moment, he instantly lost control of his right hand. His fingers loosened powerlessly and the black short sword fell to the ground. And in the dim light in the darkness, he could even see a twisted and terrifying scar bulging on his skin. It was desperately twisting, constantly rushing up his arm. It seemed that in a short moment, the strange insect would rush through his shoulder blade and straight into his chest to gnaw at his heart, lungs, and 5 internal organs. In this dark night, it was suddenly filled with infinite terrifying killing intent. It was as if the whole world had turned into a sheet of ice. Lu Chen suddenly snorted coldly. A dark flame suddenly lit up from the depths of his eyes. At the same time, in the most secret depths of his body, the quiet and lonely 5 elements divine plate suddenly trembled violently and then suddenly flipped over. The black divine plate appeared again. That dot of black flame burned in his chi. In an instant, the black flame flourished. The strange insect in his arms suddenly stopped. It seemed that in that instant, it also felt something. Even in front of his flesh and blood, this strange insect unexpectedly showed a trace of inexplicable fear. It actually had some intention of retreating. However, The darkness had arrived. Like a roar on a boundless dark sea, the endless darkness instantly boiled up and crazily surged towards Lu Chen's body from all directions. The cold wind blew and the darkness whistled. It was like a crazy dance, surrounding the cluster of dark flame in the deepest depths of the shadow. An ice-cold aura dispersed in all directions. There was no longer the slightest mercy or anger. A terrifying and murderous aura suddenly rose from Lu Chen's body. It rolled back and directly rushed from his body towards the strange insect's right arm. The dark flame flickered in this tidal wave. It was like a ferocious smile opening the mouth of an evil spirit to devour all living beings. This murderous aura was even more tyrannical, more terrifying, and more merciless than the aura that the strange insect had just revealed. That strange insect's tyrannical aura seemed to crazily devour flesh and blood. But the murderous aura in Lu Chen's body seemed to be born purely for killing. It wanted to destroy everything and wipe out all the vitality of all living beings. In the darkness, Lu Chen opened his eyes and stood upright. His body suddenly shook. Then, countless black flames suddenly gushed out from his body, burning wildly. But the strange thing was that his clothes were not damaged at all. He looked like a burning man made of black fire. The strange insect suddenly trembled violently, and then it retreated madly. However, it was already too late. The tide of darkness was like a monstrous wave that surged into the heavens, and it charged directly into Lu Chen's right arm. After that, it drowned the strange insect that was hidden within his flesh. Everything in an instant was silent. After the tide, the world was as quiet as before. Only Lu Chen's body was still standing in the darkness, gently gasping for breath. After a moment, he slowly raised his right hand and then gently shook it. With a small piece of burnt black shrunk to the size of a little finger, as hard as a rock, fell out from his wound. Then, it heavily hit the ground and rolled twice. The night wind was cold, blowing past his body. Lu Chen felt a chill from his forehead, neck, and back. Only now did he discover that in that instant, his entire body was covered in cold sweat. The black flames were still burning in his eyes. The tide of darkness was still surging in his body. He gently gasped for breath, feeling a trace of trembling. The surging black flames gradually calmed down. Then, they slowly retreated, shrinking back into his body. The night once again calmed down. Even the darkness became gently clustered around him, comforting his body. But at this time, in the strange black tide that was gradually returning to the energy sea, Lu Chen suddenly felt a trace of a different aura. It was a new aura with a murderous and tyrannical aura. It was the aura that the black flames had plundered after killing the strange insect. In the past, when he had this strange black disk, every time he killed a living being, a trace of a similar aura would be absorbed into the black flames on the black disk. Then, it would nourish and strengthen the black flames. Lu Chen didn't understand it, nor did he like this sort of feeling. It was even to the extent that he faintly had the feeling that if this continued, then he would probably sink into this terrifying slaughter one day and be doomed eternally. Therefore, after that, he rarely killed living beings, unless it was absolutely necessary and when he had to protect himself. But this night, the aura he felt was completely different from the previous slaughter. The murderous aura that had been plundered was strong and abundant, almost 10 times stronger than any slaughter in the past. And after absorbing this strong new power, the black flames on the black disk in Lu Chen's energy sea seemed to instantly grow larger. In that dark world, it burned quietly, as if it was showing a mocking smile to the owner of this body. Lu Chen stood in place in silence for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. After a long time, when he opened his eyes again, the black flames had disappeared. The surrounding night wind had cooled down and was no longer harsh. It blew through the forest as if nothing had happened in the night. Lu Chen took a step forward and squatted down. There was a black thing on the ground. He picked up the black dagger that had fallen to the side and gently fiddled with it. After confirming that there was nothing strange, he picked it up again. This was the remains of that strange insect. Under the burning of the terrifying and violent black flames in his body, This strange insect had almost no ability to resist and was directly killed. Then, its entire body was instantly incinerated, leaving only some of the hardest residue that was gathered together and turned into this black and hard stone. Of course, the strange green eyes were gone, but when Lu Chen's fingers slowly brushed across this black stone, he could still vaguely feel some soul-stirring patterns and traces. The residue of the bones and sharp teeth had fused together. It was hard to imagine that not long ago, this thing was still in the flesh, like a bloodthirsty demon. Why would there be such a terrible and cruel monster in the Kunlun Mountains? No matter how one looked at it, it was impossible for this kind of thing to appear in the Kunlun Mountains. There were 2 deity transformation stage perfected cultivators, dozens of Yuanying stage perfected cultivators, and more powerful cultivators. There were about 100,000 people in the famous sections. Any slightly more ferocious demon beasts had long been driven away. And Lu Chen was very sure that he had never heard of this kind of thing. No one in the Kunlun party had ever mentioned it. It seemed that no one had ever known that this kind of monster that suddenly appeared in the night had only appeared out of thin air tonight. Where did it come from? Lu Chen's brows were tightly furrowed. His palm tightly grasped the charred remains of the stone. He looked into the distance, only to see the shadows of the distant mountains. The darkness seemed to be everywhere. Chapter 186. That morning, when Lu Chen walked out of his wooden hut with a yawn, he saw a man standing with his hands behind his back on the quiet Fian terrace, not far from his wooden hut. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s. He had a refined bearing and a calm expression. Perhaps it was because of his age, there were already some stars on his temples, but it could still be seen that he was still in the prime of his life. The man stood there, looking at the sea of clouds beyond the cliff. Then he turned around and saw Lu Chen. He smiled calmly and quietly, nodding at Lu Chen and saying, "Hello." "Yes, hello. May I ask who you are, senior?" Lu Chen tried to recall, but he had no impression of this person before, so he asked politely. The man walked toward him and stopped a few feet away from Lu Chen. He wasn't too close to make it awkward, but he wasn't too far away to make it seem rude. He looked Lu Chen up and down, then nodded and said with a smile, "You must be Lu Chen?" I am Lu Chen. Do you know me, senior?" Lu Chen was a little surprised. The man smiled and said, "Oh, I don't think we've met before. Let me introduce myself. My surname is Su, and my name is Tianhe." "Su Tianhe?" Lu Chen repeated the name in his heart. Suddenly his expression changed. He looked at the man's face again and found him familiar. There were some similarities between him and Su Qingjun. He was surprised and said, "Could you be from the Su family?" Su Tianhe smiled and nodded. "I can be considered the head of the Su family, and also Qingjuan's father." Lu Chen was speechless. He didn't expect the head of the Su family to come to the Fian Terrace alone so early in the morning. But judging from Su Tianhe's extraordinary bearing, he was completely different from the young people in his family. At this moment, Su Tianhe's gaze swept over Lu Chen's face. After a while, he sighed and said, "Brother Lu, I didn't teach my son well and wasn't strict enough with my subordinates, causing you to suffer. This is all the fault of the Su family. I apologize in advance." After saying that, he solemnly cupped his hands and bowed to Lu Chen. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and a strange light flashed in his eyes, but he quickly stepped aside and said, "Senior, please don't do this. I don't deserve it." Su Tianhe smiled at Lu Chen and said, "Brother Lu is reasonable and an outstanding person. I believe you are also a broad-minded person." As he said that, he stepped forward and stuffed a cloth bag into Lu Chen's hand, saying, "There are some rare spiritual materials in this bag. They are probably worth thousands of spiritual stones. It's just a small token of my appreciation, but it can't make up for the guilt in my heart. Please accept it, Brother Lu. For the sake of my old face, please don't hold a grudge against our Su clan." As he said that, he looked at Lu Chen with a sincere expression. Lu Chen's face also showed some fear and nodded, saying, "Senior Su, you are too polite. How can I accept this?" As he said those polite words, Lu Chen was about to push the cloth bag out, but his fingers tightened on the cloth bag. Su Tianhe glanced at the cloth bag and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He was determined to give it to Lu Qin. The two pushed for a while, but in the end, Lu Qin reluctantly accepted it and thanked Su Tianhe with a happy face. After joking for a while, Su Tianhe and Lu Qin seemed to be chatting very congenially. Su Tianhe glanced at the cave on the other side and turned to Lu Qin, saying, "Brother Lu, I think it's getting late. Can you help me call Qing Jun and ask her to come out and meet me?" Lu Qin was slightly surprised and said, "Senior, you and she are father and daughter. Can't you just go and call her directly?" Su Tianhe sighed and said, "Brother Lu, you don't know. I was not at home a while ago. I heard that Qing Jun came back and quarreled with my wife and a few brothers. After that, we didn't contact each other for a few days. When I came back and heard about this, I immediately reprimanded them and then came up the mountain." Speaking up to here, he paused for a moment and then said sincerely, "In fact, what you said just now is also reasonable. Qing Jun and I are father and daughter. Everything can naturally be discussed. But I'm afraid that she is still angry and unwilling to see me. So, I'll have to trouble Brother Lu." Lu Qin nodded and said, "So that's how it is. All right then, I'll help you call her. However, I have to warn you first that I don't dare to guarantee that she'll come out to see you herself." Su Tianhe laughed and looked relaxed, but there seemed to be a glimmer of light flashing in the depths of his eyes. He said with a smile, It seems that Brother Lu really understands Qing Jun. Do you know that it's a little difficult to call her this morning?" Lu Qin was startled for a moment, then immediately shook his head and said with a smile, No. Senior Su, you misunderstand. How would I know? I'm just afraid that a lowly odd-job disciple like me might not pay attention to young lady Su even if I call her. All right, wait a moment, I'll go call her for you." As he said this, he turned around and walked towards the stone door of the cave residence. The morning sun sprinkled down from the sky and shone on the faces of the two men. When Lu Qin turned his back to Su Tianhe, the smiles on their faces disappeared at the same time. The man's gaze was calm and somewhat cold, deep as the sea. Lu Qin stood in front of the stone door of the cave residence and began to loudly knock on the door. Occasionally, he and Su Tianhe would look back and smile at each other and nod slightly. But after a long time, the stone door still didn't move. It seemed that Su Qingjun had no intention of coming out. Lu Qin touched his chest. There was still a yellow talisman stone lying there. It was the heart-burning talisman that Su Qingjun gave him when he planted the eagle fruit tree. She didn't take it back later on. So these days, if he wanted to find Su Qingjun, he wouldn't knock on the door like this. But now he had no intention of using the heart-burning talisman. After calling for a while, he turned back to look at Su Tianhe and said somewhat helplessly, "Senior, you see." Su Tianhe nodded and pondered for a moment before saying to Lu Qin, "In that case, it's not good for me to stay here for a long time. Moreover, I do have some things to do in the city below the mountain, so I can only leave first. Brother Lu, when you see Qingjun, please help me tell her that I've come to see her. We're all family, so there's nothing that can't be said. Ask her to come down the mountain to see me when she has time." Lu Qin responded and said, "Senior, rest assured, I will definitely pass on the message." Su Tianhe smiled and cupped his hands, then turned around and left. From the beginning to the end, he was elegant and approachable, completely different from the other Su family members that Lu Qin had seen before. He was a person that made it difficult for people not to have a good impression of him. Lu Qin's brows furrowed slightly as he watched his figure gradually disappear into the distance. As usual, Su Qingjun waited until the evening of this day before she slowly walked out of the cave residence and strolled around the Fian Terrace. Lu Qin saw her and told Su Qingjun about Su Tianhe's visit during the day. After listening, Su Qingjun was silent. The expression on her face looked a little complicated, faintly a little annoyed, but also a little guilty and ashamed. Lu Qin saw the change in her expression and did not say much. He just truthfully repeated Su Tianhe's words to her and then walked away. In that evening, Su Qingjun stood on the edge of the cliff and looked at the sea of clouds for a long time. The position where she stood was exactly where Su Tianhe stood during the day. I heard that the most difficult thing to give up in this world is the affection between parents and children. Lu Chen said to old Ma with emotion, "Unfortunately, I have never felt this feeling since I was a child. I don't know if it's so deep and hard to give up." Old Ma smiled and said, "Who said it isn't? But I didn't expect that you would tell that old man Su's words so honestly. I thought you would at least do something to it." "Nonsense, I'm not that kind of person," Lu Chen said. "Believe me you are," old Ma said. He then lowered his head and dodged a cup that Lu Chen threw at him. Then, he said with a smile, "So, as a result of this message, Su Qingjun went down the mountain and went home today?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "She has been a filial daughter of a noble family for 20 years. Her parents are still alive. How can she really break up with them? Moreover, don't underestimate Su Tianhe. I think he is very shrewd and not easy to deal with. He is much better than his useless nephews." Old Ma said with a and said, "Yes, the Su family has been thriving these years, and Su Tianhe has contributed a lot." Lu Chen did not talk about this. They sat for a while, and Lu Chen suddenly said, "How many days until the next full moon night?" Old Ma was startled and said, "Why do you ask this?" He said with a frown for a moment and then said, 19 days. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "Can the damn Baldy come back before that day?" Old Ma's eyes narrowed and his face suddenly became serious. He stared at Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "What's going on? Could it be that the spy has made a move?" Lu Chen hesitated and said, "I can't be completely sure." As he spoke, he told Old Ma about the mysterious symbol he found in the forest that day and what he understood from it. In the end, he said, "Whether the traitor will appear that day or not, and whether he will meet me, I still can't say for sure." Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "I will immediately report this to Milord, and then you come back in 3 days. How about it?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "Okay." Old Ma still showed a trace of joy on his face and said, "If we can find the spies so smoothly, we will be relieved." Lu Chen smiled and said, "What's wrong? Could it be that you originally wanted to search here for more than 10 years? Old Ma thought for a moment and said with a smile, "I don't need more than 10 years, but I really thought that it might take at least a few years." The two smiled at each other. After a moment, Lu Chen seemed to ask him casually, "Oh yes, you are quite knowledgeable. Have you heard of a strange insect with 3 green eyes, shaped like a small snake that devours flesh and blood?" You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.